Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Statement. The Prime Minister.
Thank you. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to update the House on our negotiations to leave the European Union. Last week, I set out the details of the draft withdrawal agreement, which will ensure our smooth and orderly departure when we leave the European Union on the 29th of March next year. I also updated the House on the outline political declaration that set out a framework for the future relationship we want between the UK and the EU. Last night, I met with President Juncker in Brussels to work through the details of the full political declaration on this future relationship. We had good discussions in which I was clear about what we need in order to ensure the best possible deal for the United Kingdom. We then tasked our negotiating teams to work through the remaining issues, and as a result, the text of the political declaration has now been agreed between the UK and the European Commission, and I updated the Cabinet on this progress this morning. Mr. Speaker, the draft text that we have agreed with the Commission is a good deal for our country and for our partners in the EU. It honours the vote of the British people by taking back control of our borders, our laws and our money, while protecting jobs, security and the integrity of our precious United Kingdom. It ends free movement once and for all. Instead, we will introduce a new skills-based immigration system based not on the country people come from, but on what they can contribute to the UK. It ends the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in the UK. Yes, it does. We will make our own laws in our own parliaments here in Westminster and in Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast, and they will be adjudicated on by UK courts. And it means an end to sending vast sums of money to the EU, so we can take full control of our money to spend on priorities, including our long-term plan for the NHS, to which we've committed to spending over £394 million more per week by 2023-24. And just this morning, I was able to announce a major new investment in primary and community care worth £3.5 billion a year in real terms by 2023-24. Mr. Speaker, the text we have now agreed would create a new free trade area with the European Union, with no tariffs, fees, charges or quantitative restrictions. This will be the first such agreement between the EU and any advanced economy in the world, which will be good for jobs. The EU said that the choice was binary, Norway or Canada. The political declaration recognises that there is a spectrum, with the extent of our commitments taken into account in deciding the level of checks and controls. Crucially, the text we have agreed also has an explicit reference to development of an independent trade policy by the UK beyond this partnership with the EU. So we would have the ability to sign new trade deals with other countries and capitalise on the opportunities in the fastest growing economies around the world. And we will be able to get on with this, negotiating deals during the implementation period and putting them in place immediately afterwards. The deal would mean we leave the common agricultural policy and the common fisheries policy. Mr. Speaker, let me be absolutely clear about what this would mean for fishing. We would become an independent coastal state, with control over our waters, so our fishermen get a fairer share of the fish in our waters. We have firmly rejected a link between access to our waters and access to markets. The fisheries agreement is not something we will be trading off against any other priorities. We are clear that we will negotiate access and quotas on an annual basis, as, for example, do other independent coastal states like Norway and Iceland. The trade agreement with the EU would also cover services and investment that will go further than any other recent EU agreements. And it would secure new arrangements for our financial services sector, ensuring that market access cannot be withdrawn on a whim and providing stability and certainty for our world-leading industry. We would also have a cutting-edge agreement on digital, helping to facilitate e-commerce and reduce unjustified barriers to trade by electronic means. And there would be strong rules in place to keep trade fair and ensure neither side can unfairly subsidise their industries against the other. The text we have agreed with the European Commission also includes a new security partnership, with a close relationship on defence and tackling crime and terrorism to keep all our people safe. There would be a surrender agreement to bring criminals to justice no matter where in Europe they break the law. And there would be arrangements for sharing of data, including on DNA, passenger name records and fingerprints. The new security partnership would also ensure close cooperation between our police forces and other law enforcement bodies, and we would continue to work together on sanctions against those who violate international rules or commit atrocities. And there would be joint working on meeting cybersecurity threats and supporting international efforts to prevent money laundering and the financing of terrorists. Finally, as I set out for the House last week, the draft withdrawal agreement will ensure that we transition to this new and ambitious future relationship in a smooth and orderly way. It will deliver a 20-month implementation period so that we have time to put our new future relationship in place and that businesses have time to prepare for it. It will protect the rights of EU citizens living in the UK and UK citizens living in the EU so they can carry on living their lives as before. It will ensure a fair settlement on our financial obligations, less than half what some originally expected. And it will meet our commitment to ensure there is no hard border between Northern Ireland and no customs border in the Irish Sea. Mr. Speaker, the text we have agreed is explicit about the determination of both sides to avoid the backstop altogether by getting the future relationship in place on the 1st of January 2021. And in the unlikely event that we ever did need the backstop, to ensure it is quickly superseded either by the future relationship or alternative arrangements. As part of this, there is an explicit commitment to consider facilitative arrangements and technologies which could avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland. And I'm grateful to my right honourable friends, the members for Chingford and Woodford Green and for North Shropshire, for their ideas on this. Preparatory work on alternative arrangements to avoid the backstop would begin before we leave, enabling rapid progress after our withdrawal. Mr. Speaker, I want to be very clear about the stage we've reached in these negotiations and the scale of what is now at stake. We have an agreed text between the UK and the European Commission. The text is today being shared with the leaders of the other 27 member states ahead of the Special EU Council on Sunday. The negotiations are now at a critical moment, and all our efforts must be focused on working with our European partners to bring this process to a final conclusion in the interests of all our people. Last night I spoke to Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain. We have been working constructively with the governments of Spain and Gibraltar in the negotiations on the withdrawal agreement, and we want this work to continue in the future relationship. But I was absolutely clear that Gibraltar's British sovereignty will be protected, and that the future relationship we agree must work for the whole UK family. Today I met Chancellor Kurz of Austria, which currently holds the EU's presidency, and later today and tomorrow I will be speaking to other European leaders ahead of returning to Brussels on Saturday. Mr. Speaker, the British people want Brexit to be settled. They want a good deal that sets us on a course for a brighter future. And they want us to come together as a country and to move on, to focus on the big issues at home, like our NHS. The deal that will enable us to do this is now within our grasp. In these crucial 72 hours ahead, I will do everything possible to deliver it for the British people, and I commend this statement to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for the advance copy of her statement. These 26 pages are a testament to the failure of the Tories' bungled negotiations. 19 extra pages, but nothing has changed. The only certainty contained within these pages is that the transition period will have to be extended, or we will end up with a backstop and no exit. It represents the worst of all worlds. No say over the rules that will continue to apply, and no certainty for the future. There is no change to the withdrawal agreement, no unilateral pull-out mechanism, no concessions on the backstop, which would create a new regulatory border down the Irish Sea. Mr. Speaker, did the EU not receive the amendments and improvements promised by the Leader of the House? A little over a year ago, we were confidently told by the government that by the end of the Article 50 period, we would have a trade deal. The International Trade Secretary said it would be the easiest in human history. Instead, we have 26 pages of waffle. This empty document could have been written 2 years ago. It's peppered with phrases such as the parties will look at, the parties will explore. What on earth has the government been doing for the last 2 years? They've managed less than 1 page a month since the referendum. The Prime Minister said nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. It's clear from this document that indeed nothing is agreed. This is the blindfold Brexit we all feared, a leap in the dark. It falls short of our Labour's 6 tests. This government could have negotiated a new comprehensive customs union, giving certainty to business and securing manufacturing industry and manufacturing industry jobs. Instead, Mr. Speaker, they're more interested with dog whistling on immigration. I hope.
Order. When the Prime Minister delivered her statement, she delivered it to a largely attentive and courteous House. Order. I couldn't care less what somebody largely inaudibly and certainly irrelevantly chunters from a sedentary position. The Prime Minister was heard in courtesy. The Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, will likewise be heard in courtesy. If it requires the process to take a bit longer, so be it. If it requires it to take a lot longer, so be it. If it takes several hours, so be it. So give up, be quiet, behave on both sides, and let's hear people speak. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope the Prime Minister will abandon the sort of poisonous and divisive rhetoric about EU nationals jumping the queue. European Union nationals have contributed massively to this country across all industry and public services, while it is this government and this Prime Minister as Home Secretary who built a hostile environment for non-EU immigrants. Chequers has been chucked. There is no common rule book and no mention of frictionless trade. Our participation is downgraded in a number of European agencies, or we're out of them in their entirety. After more than 2 years of negotiations, Mr. Speaker, there is no clarity over our status with a range of European-wide agencies. The Erasmus scheme, the Galileo project, Euratom, the European Medicines Agency, the European Chemicals Agency and the European Aviation Safety Industry. Or on none of these do we know our final status. Take, for example, section 107 of the document. It says, and I wish to quote from it, the parties should consider appropriate arrangements for cooperation on space. Well, what a remarkable negotiating achievement that is. After 2 years, they're going to consider appropriate arrangements. Mr. Speaker, this is waffle. The blindfold Brexit of a government that spent more time arguing with itself than negotiating for Britain. On fisheries, the Prime Minister and the Environment Secretary have been saying that Britain will leave the common fisheries policy and become an independent coastal nation. Yet, this agreement sets an aspiration to establish a new fisheries agreement on access to waters and quota shares by summer 2020. That sounds to me like we're replacing membership of the common fisheries policy with a new common fisheries policy. It's clear absolutely clear that during what will now inevitably be an extended transition period, there will be no control of our money, our laws and our borders, or indeed of fishing stocks for a very long time to come. The Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and said a deal had been agreed between the UK and the European Commission, and it was now up to the EU 27. Until this Parliament has debated and voted, there is no UK agreement. This half-baked deal is a product of 2 years of botched negotiations in which the Prime Minister's red lines have been torn up, cabinet resignations have been racked up and Chequers has been chucked. This is a vague menu of options, not a plan for the future and not capable of bringing our country together.
Prime Minister!
Can I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, I have to say to him that on virtually everything he said in his response to my statement, he couldn't be more wrong. Indeed, I didn't believe that he'd actually even read the political declaration that we've published today, like the withdrawal agreement. He did quote, I know, one sentence from it, I think in an attempt to suggest that he'd actually read the document, where he said there was, which was an example, he said, of lack of detail. Well, perhaps if he'd read some of the other aspects of this document, he would know there is significant detail in this document. No tariffs, fees, charges or quantitative restrictions across all goods sectors. No other major economy has this. Liberalisation in trade in services, well beyond the parties' WTO commitments, building on recent union FTAs. An equivalence decision on financial services, a comprehensive air transport agreement, reciprocal arrangements for timely, effective and efficient exchange of passenger name records and of DNA, fingerprints and vehicle registration data, enabling the UK to participate on a case-by-case basis in common security and defence policy, missions and operations. There's plenty more. I could go on, but I think the Right Honourable Gentleman is beginning to get the message about this. Now, he also talked about where he thought that somehow we hadn't achieved any changes. Well, let me be clear on some of those changes. I referred to at least one of them in my statement. The EU said that the choice was binary, Norway or Canada. The political declaration concedes that there is a spectrum, the extent of our commitments taken into account in deciding the levels of checks and controls. The EU said we couldn't share security capabilities as a non-member state outside of free movement and outside of the Schengen area. The political declaration grants us direct access to some and enables us and promises to enable many others. Further commitments than they have made to any non-member state. They said we couldn't preserve the invisible customs border between Northern Ireland and Ireland without splitting our customs territory. The withdrawal agreement maintains the integrity of the UK's customs territory. Again, I could go through some further points. And he talks about the common fisheries policy. Now, this is where I began to think that maybe the Right Honourable Gentleman had read the document but not understood the document or what lies behind it. If we are going to ensure that we are able to continue to have access to the waters of other European member states and European Union member states as we do at the moment, we will need to negotiate, as other non-EU member states do, an annual agreement on access to waters between the UK and the European Union. The point at the moment is that we're not able to do that as an independent coastal state, and in the future we will be able to do that as an independent coastal state. And I also have to say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, what I have been doing throughout this is looking at what the best interests are of the United Kingdom. So let's just go through his other challenge to this, which was the 6 Labour tests on Brexit. Does it ensure a strong and collaborative future relationship with the EU? No. Yes. Does it ensure the fair management of migration in the interests of the economy and communities? Yes. Does it defend rights and protections and prevent a race to the bottom? Yes. Does it protect national security and our capacity to tackle cross-border? Yes, it does. And does it deliver? Does it deliver?
Mr. Mahmood, we don't need you gesticulating. You're not a football referee or a linesperson. Calm yourself, man. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And does it ensure that it delivers a deal that is good for every part of the UK? Yes, it does. And can I just say to the right honourable gentleman, this is a good deal for the United Kingdom. It delivers on the vote of the British people. It brings back control of our borders, our money and our laws. It protects jobs, it protects security, it protects the integrity of the United Kingdom. He may want to play party politics. I'm working in the national interest.
Mr. Ian Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I say to my right honourable friend that I, of course, appreciate enormously the huge endeavours she has made to deal with what has now emerged as a particularly toxic issue, that of the Northern Irish backstop, now bound into the withdrawal agreement. I do say to my right honourable friend, for all of that effort and work, the reality is that this is not the withdrawal agreement. And the withdrawal agreement will make it very clear that should we, even under these terms, struggle with a negotiation for a free trade arrangement and not complete that process, we will fall into the Northern Ireland backstop as it exists at the moment. And that will mean simply that we will be bound by those restrictions that force Northern Ireland into a separate arrangement and us into the customs union. And I simply say to my right honourable friend, therefore, I would hope that she would now consider that none of this is at all workable unless we get the withdrawal agreement now amended so that any arrangements we make strip out that backstop and leave us with that positive open border that we talked about.
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, first of all, he based the premise of his question was that if the future relationship is not in place by the 1st of January 2021, and if in some sense there needs to be that interim arrangement, then automatically we would go into the backstop. That is not the case. The withdrawal agreement makes clear that there is the alternative of an extension to the implementation period, but it also refers to these alternative arrangements, and as I said in my statement, I'm grateful to him for the proposals that he has put forward in relation to that matter, and we are working on those alternative arrangements. So it is simply not the case that automatically we fall into a backstop, into the backstop that is described in the withdrawal agreement. And secondly, there are many ways, I won't go through the full list, there are many ways in the document where it is clear that that arrangement, whether it is the extension of the IP, an alternative arrangement or a backstop, is there for a temporary period before we're able to put the future relationship into place. What the backstop and those alternative arrangements and the proposals amount to are what I think my right honourable friend was talking about at the end of his question, which is our commitment to the people of Northern Ireland that there will be no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and that they will be able to carry on their business much as they do today. That, I hope, is what we are all striving to achieve in relation to this matter. There are a number of ways in which we can achieve that, and the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration make clear that there are a number of ways we can achieve that, and we're working on all of those.
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of her statement. This government really is spluttering forward in a haphazard, chaotic way. There are, of course, outstanding political concerns still to be addressed by the EU27 this Sunday. Central to this political declaration remains the matter of fishing rights, a matter critical to Scotland. Mr. Speaker, a week ago, Scottish Conservative members in this place wrote to the Prime Minister. They said, at the end of the implementation period, we must be able to negotiate access and quota shares with the EU and other third countries independently. This means that access and quota shares cannot be included in the future economic partnership. The political declaration agreed today, paragraph 75 states, within the context of the overall economic partnership, the parties should establish a new fisheries agreement on inter-ally access to waters and quota shares. Mr Speaker, there we have it. Scotland's fishing community is once again a bargaining chip used by a Tory government in Brussels. Worse, the detail in the draft withdrawal agreement has pitted fishing against aquaculture, access to water versus access to trade, making plain, once again, that Scottish interests are expendable. Just as was the case when the UK entered the then EEC under the leadership of Ted Heath, when the Conservatives traded away our fishing rights, they have continually done so. Mr Speaker, Scotland's fishing rights thrown overboard as if they were discarded fish. So much for taking back control, more like trading away Scotland's interests. This is an absolute dereliction of the promises Scottish Conservative members and the Secretary of the State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs have made to Scotland. Shame on them. Will the Prime Minister tell the House if her Scottish MPs and Secretary of State have agreed to this political declaration? Is it not the case that she has just lost further critical votes on the deal because the Scottish Tory MPs could not possibly vote in favour of this sellout of Scottish fishing interests?
Mr Speaker, I think it would be helpful for the right honourable gentleman if I repeated what I said in the statement. We would become an independent coastal state with control over our waters, so our fishermen get a fairer share of the fish in our waters. We have firmly rejected a link between access to our waters and access to markets. The fisheries agreement is not something we will be trading off against any other priorities. We are clear that we will negotiate access and quotas on an annual basis, as, for example, do other independent coastal states like Norway and Iceland. And can I say, well, the right honourable gentleman may choose to shout at me from a sedentary position, but I have to say to him he devoted all of his response to my statement in...
Order. No, I understand the right honourable gentleman adheres very strongly to his position. It's in the nature of holding an opinion. But he must hear the response from the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The right honourable gentleman devoted all of his response to the issue of fishing. He is sitting there chuntering from a sedentary position that this is a sellout of Scottish fishermen. I will tell him what a sellout of Scottish fishermen would be. It's the policy of the Scottish nationalists to stay in the CFP.
And Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does my right honourable friend accept this declaration is self-contradictory in that it insists on both the sovereignty of both the EU and the United Kingdom legal orders, and also that without control of our own laws and by surrendering to binding rulings of the European Court, this declaration cannot be reconciled with the repeal of the 1972 Act, nor the referendum vote? And will she further note that the European Scrutiny Committee has resolved to hold an inquiry into the government's handling and outcome of these negotiations?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend that this political declaration asserts the sovereignty of both sides of this agreement, of the United Kingdom and the European Union, because that is exactly what will persist. We will be a sovereign nation. We will no longer be under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. There are circumstances where a point that is being looked at, for example, in arbitration, is considered to be a matter of the interpretation of European Union law. There is one body that interprets European Union law, that is that is the European Court of Justice. And what we make clear is, in those circumstances, the arbitration panel may ask the European Court of Justice for an opinion on the interpretation of European Union law. They will then consider their decision as an arbitration panel in the light of that opinion.
Owen Paterson.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her movement in paragraphs 26 and 27, taking on board our proposals to use modern techniques used elsewhere and modern processes on the Irish border. But there is a big but in this. As long as the backstop is in existence in a legally binding document, there is a danger that should talks fail, the backstop becomes accepted. We have the horror of being in the customs union, the horror of Northern Ireland being split off under a different regime, and as I saw in Washington this week, if we cannot control our tariffs and our regulatory regime, we cannot do free trade deals with other countries. So at this late stage, would she consider withdrawing the backstop from the legally binding draft document and replacing it with the draft trade facilitation chapter and border protocol which we gave her earlier in the week, and making that legally binding so that could become the new backstop?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, and as I indicated, I'm grateful to him and my right honourable friend, the member for Chingford and Woodford Green, for the work that they have been doing on this issue. What we negotiated in the withdrawal agreement was the specific reference to alternative arrangements that enable us to work up those alternative arrangements such that they would be, what the title suggests, an alternative to the arrangements for the backstop, or would enable us to come out of the backstop if it was the case that the backstop had been started, that we had been started down the route of being in the backstop. I continue to say to my honourable and right honourable friends, and to members of this House more widely, it is the firm determination of this government, and indeed it is the determination of the European Union, that we will work to ensure that we have the future relationship arranged and able to be in place by the 1st of January 2021. It is not the case, and it indeed is not the case, that there is a sense in which the backstop is automatic. The backstop is not automatic. There are alternatives to the backstop. It will be, and the United Kingdom can choose those alternatives. Now, there are pros and cons. There are pros and cons in these. And when the time comes, obviously, that choice will measure those pros and cons. But what matters is that it is the case that it will not be the case that the only way to deal with that interim period is through the backstop. It can be dealt with by alternative arrangements or by an extension to the implementation period.
Gable.
Mr. Speaker, this is essentially an agreement to have an agreement, and is full of worryingly vague aspirations. How, for example, can the Prime Minister justify... how can the Prime Minister justify Clause 24, which relates to medicines, chemicals and aviation safety, where we currently have strong, agreed, cooperative standards, and the Prime Minister has managed to negotiate an agreement where we, quote, explore the possibility of cooperation. I mean, that is pathetically weak. And it will cause great anxiety to millions of people who depend on high standards of safety.
Prime Minister.
The right honourable gentleman, that when we leave the European Union, we will cease to be a member of certain agencies that the European Union has at the moment. What we will be doing is ensuring, and you might have noticed that there is a strong reference to close cooperation in the text in relation to EASA. EASA already permits a third country to have that access to the agency. That is not the case with the EMA and the ECA, and that is why, as indeed we identified in the white paper we published in the summer, it will be necessary to work on what those access arrangements to those agencies should be. So EASA already has a model that can be used. The other two agencies do not. But I say to the right honourable gentleman that I think in relation to these negotiations, we are not able to put legal text together until we have left the European Union and are no longer a member of the European Union. And that, of course, is what we will be able to do when we leave on the 29th of March 2019.
Mr. Dominic Raab.
The backstop ties the UK to the customs union and single market rules with no voice and an EU veto over our exit, whilst paragraph 23 of the political declaration makes that the starting point for future relations to build on. The top reason people voted to leave the EU was to take back democratic control over our laws. Isn't it the regrettable but inescapable reality that this deal gives even more away?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, and I think this is the first opportunity I had to be able to and honourable members of this House, the point about the backstop, the point that the backstop is not the automatic route for dealing with a temporary period in relation to any gap that exists between the end of the implementation period in December 2020 and the future relationship coming into place. The political declaration is about that future relationship. There are important points that have been agreed within the withdrawal agreement that will ensure that we can get a good agreement in relation to borders and in relation to our trade area when we join, when we become that independent state outside of the European Union. And my right honourable friend will be aware, as is reflected in this political declaration, there is a spectrum and there is a balance between willingness to abide by rules and the necessity for checks and at the border. And that, of course, is what it is. Continues to be our ambition and our objective to get that frictionless trade at the border, because we believe that's important.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor of the Exchequer said last night that he didn't like the backstop. He doesn't think that the backstop is a good arrangement for our economy, and he doesn't think it is a good arrangement for our union. We agree with the Chancellor of the Exchequer. In light of the political declaration in paragraph 27, to which the Prime Minister referred, it is now clear that the EU are beginning to accept that there are alternative arrangements that can be put in place without the need for the backstop. And I would say to the Prime Minister that if she wants to have the support of my party for the withdrawal agreement, then we need to see an end of the backstop and those alternative arrangements put in place.
Prime Minister.
The gentleman for his comments. Can I say to him, he started off by reflecting the comments that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, have made. As I've said in this chamber, and others have said in this chamber, none of us want to see the backstop being used. The best way to ensure the backstop is not used is to get the future relationship into place. There are all those alternative arrangements, and we will be working on those alternative arrangements, and I'm happy to discuss with the right honourable gentleman and his colleagues what those alternative arrangements could be. But what is important is that we have within the document means in which we can guarantee to the people of Northern Ireland, and obviously from the EU's point of view they want that guarantee in relation to Ireland, that trade across the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland can continue as it does today. That is the commitment that we've made, no hard border, and that is what we will continue to be committed to providing.
Mr. Damien Green.
Mr. Speaker, outside this House, there's a much higher appreciation of the tenacity of the Prime Minister in pursuing a successful deal than we sometimes hear inside it. One of the principal worries, as we're hearing, has been that in some way we'll be trapped forever, either in the backstop or in a customs union. What is there in this declaration and in the withdrawal agreement to calm those fears?
Minister. There are several elements that I would suggest to my right honourable friend would calm those fears. First of all, there are many statements within the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration which explicitly recognise that the backstop, should it be necessary, would only be a temporary arrangement. Indeed, Article 50, which is the legal basis for the withdrawal agreement, cannot establish a permanent relationship. That is reflected in the text, and that is accepted by the European Union. There are also, as I have just explained, the alternative arrangements that can be put in place and the possible extension to the implementation period. But the best route of ensuring that those concerns are calmed is to ensure that we work to get the future relationship, as set out in this political declaration, in place by the 1st of January 2021, so that there is no need for any interim arrangement at all to provide our guarantee and commitment to the people of Northern Ireland.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the withdrawal agreement, this political declaration is not legally binding. And although it may now be 26 pages as opposed to 7, it still does not provide this House with clarity and certainty about our future economic relationship with our biggest, nearest and most important trading partner. Is it really going to take the defeat of her deal to persuade the Prime Minister that she cannot achieve frictionless trade while leaving the customs union and the single market, and that therefore, sooner or later, a different approach is going to have to be found in order to secure the future of our economy and the jobs that depend upon it?
Prime Minister.
I say to the right honourable gentleman that, of course, we have put forward proposals which would enable frictionless trade to be achieved outside of the customs union and outside of the single market. That is not something that is accepted by everyone in the European Union. I fully accept that. But what we have within the future negotiations is the ability to continue to work for our objective of achieving that frictionless trade. But he talks about a concern about uncertainty and into the future. I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, the thing that would create most uncertainty in the future is a failure to take and agree a deal which is going to be good for the UK, which delivers on the vote of the people in the referendum and does so while protecting people's jobs and security.
Mr. Boris Johnson.
Speaker, can I regretfully point out to my right honourable friend that, of course, nothing in this political declaration changes the hard reality of the withdrawal agreement that gives the EU a continuing veto over the unilateral power of the entire United Kingdom to do free trade deals or to take back control of our laws. And can I therefore respectfully suggest that it would be better, we can accept the generalities and the self-contradictions contained in this political declaration, but we should junk forthwith the backstop upon which the future economic partnership, according to this political declaration, is to be based, and which makes a complete nonsense of Brexit.
Prime Minister.
I'm sure my right honourable friend will recall the discussions we had earlier in the year when we were agreeing the temporary customs arrangement as our proposal for the basis on which we would ensure that we guaranteed the commitment through the people of Northern Ireland. And indeed, obviously, elements of that have been reflected in what we see in the withdrawal agreement. There are various arrangements that we can put in place, as I have said to others, to others who have questioned me so far in this statement, in relation to the backstop. But can I say to my right honourable friend, the future relationship we have set out in the political declaration ends free movement, ends sending vast sums of money to the European Union every year, and ends the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice here in the United Kingdom. And it enables us to hold an independent trade policy and to negotiate trade deals around the whole of the world. I know that my right honourable friend has expressed his desire in the past to have all of those elements available for the United Kingdom, and that is what this deal delivers.
Shukra Amuna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As has been said, this is a declaration of aspiration and a charter for years of uncertainty. It is not the comprehensive free trade deal she promised we would have before exit day in her Lancaster House speech. So, having broken that promise, can she now guarantee that that comprehensive free trade deal will be finalised by the end of the transition period? Because so far, this gives no certainty whatsoever to our businesses.
Prime Minister.
Well, on the contrary, I think if the honourable gentleman looks at the comments that have been made by business in relation to the declaration, that were made, in fact, in relation to the outline political declaration last week, like the Federation of Small Businesses, are very clear about the certainty that is provided looking into the future for businesses. And as he will also see when he looks through the political declaration, and indeed in the withdrawal agreement, the firm commitment on both sides to ensure that we work to put into place that legal text. And yes, it is the case that we can't have the legal text on the future agreement until we have left the European Union. And one of the elements within the political declaration, towards the end of the political declaration, as he will have seen, sets out the commitments in relation to working on that for the future. But I think, if I say to the honourable gentleman, what is important is that we have here an outline, a political declaration, which is fuller than the outline we published last week, which sets out very clearly a deal for the UK that is good for the United Kingdom and good for jobs.
Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't believe this is a good deal for Britain, and I don't think many young people in our country think this is a good deal for Britain at all. Does the Prime Minister accept that if the meaningful vote is lost, and if this House votes also against exiting the EU with no deal, that the only right option then is to go back to the people and allow them to have a final say, including young people, on the direction?
People should not be shouting out. The Right Honourable Lady is asking her Right Honourable Friend the Prime Minister a question. Have the manners to listen. Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think young people would like to be listened to in this debate as well. I was asking the Prime Minister whether, if the meaningful vote is lost, and if this House, as I believe it will, votes against no deal as an exit from the EU, does the government intend to come back with an alternative proposal on how to break the deadlock, and why would that not include going back to the British people to ask them their views?
The Prime Minister.
To my right honourable friend that, of course, we have set out in legislation the procedure that would be followed were the meaningful vote to be lost in this House. But she asks about going back to the people in terms of a second referendum. I will say to my right honourable friend, as I have said now on many occasions here in this House, this House and this Parliament overwhelmingly gave the British people the choice as to whether or not to leave the European Union. The people of Britain voted to leave the European Union. I believe it is important that politicians don't turn round and say, well, what do you think now? Would you like to think again? But we actually say, you voted to leave and we will deliver that Brexit, that leaving of the European Union.
And Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister told us in her concluding remarks that she wants to move on to focus on the big issues like our National Health Service. But how does she expect to move on when she signed up to a deal which does nothing for our services sector? Our services sector comprises 80% of our economy, things like retail, banks, leisure and tourism. Can the Prime Minister give our country today a guarantee that our UK service sector will enjoy the same access to the single market that it enjoys today?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the honourable lady that if she looks at the sections that we have on the services sector, she will see that these arrangements that we have in the political declaration go beyond any that have been offered to any other non-member of the European Union.
Patrick McLaughlin.
I say to my right honourable friend that the number of people who I speak to are fully in admiration of the determination which the Prime Minister has shown over these very difficult negotiations, doing something which no other Prime Minister has ever been tasked with doing. Would she like to explain to the House a little bit more that if this agreement, which is the 585 pages of the withdrawal agreement and today's document which has been agreed with the Commission is rejected, does she think the 6 paragraphs offered by the opposition is the alternative?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend, first of all, for his opening remarks, and secondly, say no. And I think what we see from the opposition is they've set these 6 tests, but actually in no stage have they set out what their plan for an alternative arrangement with the European Union would be.
And Liz Saville-Roberts.
When questioned over whether any deal is financially worse than EU membership, the Chancellor said, like last night, it's not only about the economics. I have news for the Prime Minister. We say it's all about the economics. The people can now see that the British government is swivel-eyed in its determination to rip the UK out of the single market and the customs union. Isn't it time to take the deal back to the people and let them decide what matters most?
Prime Minister.
Lady, that I've responded when I responded to my right honourable friend, the member for Putney, on the issue of the second referendum. On the question of the economy, this is a deal that protects jobs and protects livelihoods across the whole of the United Kingdom.
Mr. Dominic Grieve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't the lesson of this long negotiation that when you try to unravel yourself from an international rules-based system because you don't like the rules, unless you want chaos, you start creating a completely new set of rules, many of which are in fact as binding and onerous on this country as any which we had before. And in that context, the backstop, I have to say this to my right honourable friend, is a constitutional anomaly of the first order because it makes the EU the guarantor of a bilateral treaty between ourselves and Ireland of which the people have never been consulted. And I would urge her in those circumstances, if she wants to go ahead with this, to put her deal to the people of this country and to offer to them the alternative of remaining, because the one big eye-opener one sees from all this is that however hard she's tried, at the end of the day, we will be in an international rules-based system, because that, in fact, is where our national interest lies.
My right honourable and learned friend has heard me respond to the issue of asking the people in a second referendum what their views are. But I will also say to my right honourable friend, what we have negotiated here is an arrangement with the European Union which does continue to have a close partnership between the United Kingdom and the EU. I believe that is the right thing for us to do. I believe coming out of the EU will enable us to develop even closer partnerships with other countries around the world through our trade deals and indeed through other support and work we'll be able to do with them on security and defence. But I think it's also important, given our geographical position, given that the EU is our nearest neighbour in terms of trading, that we continue to have that good relationship with the EU, and that's what this delivers.
Angela Eagle.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister now admit that extending the aspirations into a political declaration that's 19 pages longer than the original series of vague aspirations isn't actually a deal?
Yeah.
And when will she actually get to having a deal so that when we vote to leave on the Withdrawal Act, we know where we're leaving to? And will she tell the House whatever happened to frictionless trade, because it's not mentioned at all in her list of aspirations?
I say to the honourable lady that the position, as I've mentioned to others, is that of course it is not possible for us to agree the legal text of our future relationship with the European Union until we have left the European Union. And she might like to look, if she looks once again at the text that she will see here, she will see that it very clearly expresses what we have expressed previously in relation to trade, that there is a spectrum, that there is a balance between commitments that are given on rules and the issue of the checks that take place at the border. And it remains our intention as a government to work towards that frictionless trade.
Mrs. Theresa Villiers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I fully appreciate that there are clearly parts of this document which are positive and which I welcome, but my grave worry with it is that it'll never come into effect anyway, because the EU is unlikely to agree a new economic partnership with us because the withdrawal agreement locks us into paying the 38 billion, and also commits us to a backstop which has us obeying their rules and applying their customs rules without any say over them.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, this is, and I recognise the concern that she has expressed in relation to the backstop, but actually the reality of the position from the European Union is the complete opposite. There are those in the European Union who actively believe that the backstop would be an advantageous place for the United Kingdom to be. Advantageous because, in their eyes, they see it has that access to the market of the European Union without any payment and without free movement. That is not something that they actively want us to be in. That's why both sides have made clear throughout this document that we don't want the backstop to come into place at all, and were it to come into place, it would only be temporary.
Mr. Pete Wishart.
Can I congratulate the Prime Minister, because she's managed to satisfy her immigration obsession and she's dealt with the EU queue jumpers. But isn't it the case that what we do to them, they will do unto us? Yeah. And her agreement only aims to provide visa-free travel only for short-term visits to the EU. Isn't it the case, Prime Minister, that the rights you and I enjoyed to live, work and love in a continent of 27 nations will be deprived from the next generations of young people?
To the honourable gentleman, as he knows full well, what we will be doing in relation to immigration is bringing an end to free movement once and for all. We will have an immigration system which will be based not on where somebody comes from, but on the contribution they are able to make to this economy. That will be good for the whole of the United Kingdom, including Scotland.
Sir Nicholas Soames.
Speaker, may I welcome this political declaration, in particular paragraph 77 on global cooperation enshrined in this agreement. Will she agree with me that we must now continue to work closer than ever with our European partners, even when we leave the European Union, on the trans-border issues like climate change, trade protectionism, and all the other issues that we have to deal with together and cannot deal with singly?
I'd say to my right honourable friend, I think he is absolutely right, and that's why it's important that we have that section in this political declaration. We are leaving the European Union. We're not leaving Europe. It will make sense for us to continue to cooperate with our European partners on a whole range of issues which affect us, which affect the whole world, and on which our being able to work together will be important in terms of how we can address those issues and resolve them, exactly as he suggests on issues like climate change.
Mr. Ben Bradshaw.
Poorer, with less control, and years of more uncertainty. In her heart of hearts, does she honestly think this is what people were voting for 2.5 years ago?
No. I say to the right honourable gentleman, I think there were a number of my colleagues who, when he started talking about poorer and with more uncertainty, thought he was describing a Labour government. I think what people voted for was to bring an end to free movement, to take control of our borders, our money and our laws. But they wanted us to do it in a way that protected their jobs, protected their security and protected our United Kingdom. That's exactly what this deal does.
Sir Peter Bottomley.
One of my constituents, who's on the other side of the referendum vote, has written to me today saying it appears that the UK Brexit requirements are being achieved, or as close as going to be achievable, and he wants to applaud the Prime Minister and her team for the negotiation, and says anyone who votes against this deal will be actually voting against the referendum result and the interest of the country. Can I put it to the Prime Minister? I think that's representative of many people in all parties throughout the country.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for bringing his constituents' views to the House today. I think when every member of this House looks at the vote, at the meaningful vote, they will precisely have to ask themselves the question that that constituent has asked: does this deliver on the vote, and does it do it in a way that's good for the United Kingdom? And I think the answer is unequivocally yes.
Kate Hoey.
The Prime Minister seems to imply in Clause 27 that these new facilitative arrangements and technologies to prevent a hard border are somehow new. These have been around for some time, and the customs officials, all sorts of people have written about this. The fact is that the Prime Minister's team has not looked at this seriously until very recently. Even at this late stage, could I say to the Prime Minister, the backstop has no need to be in a legal agreement. It should be taken out, and we should get on with getting these kinds of changes that would make a hard border impossible.
To the right honourable lady. that she is right that, of course, there have been ideas around for some time in relation to the way in which customs and treatment of customs is developing with today's technology, but there are further technological solutions that I think will be available. But this is not the question of the no hard border. We have a commitment to no hard border, but I believe it's important that we also try to work to ensure that businesses and people in Northern Ireland are able to carry on their business and their daily life much as they do today. This is about no hard border, but it's also about our overall commitment to the people of Northern Ireland.
Mr Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I refer my right honourable friend to paragraph 134 of the proposal on the question of interpretation of union law, which gives authority to the Court of Justice of the European Union. Why is there not a similar paragraph giving the right of interpretation of UK law to the UK courts, or is it implicit that European Union law is senior?
Can I say to my honourable friend, it is not the case that European Union law is senior. It is the case that we have consistently said throughout all of the negotiations and made clear at various points that the court of one party cannot have jurisdiction over the other party. But the only body that interprets European law is the CJEU. As this makes clear, the arbitration panel can decide that they ask the CJEU for an opinion on the interpretation of EU law. UK law is interpreted indeed by United Kingdom courts, and the arbitration panel, when it comes to making its decision, had it referred the ECJ to give an opinion on a matter of European Union law, would take their decision in the light of that opinion.
Mr Vice Chairman.
The Prime Minister knows that this is a complicated and at a very historic time for all of us. This is the future of our country that we're deciding. But she also knows that most honest MPs will say we haven't had a chance yet really to evaluate this. And she knows that by Sunday, many people, the economists, the pundits, the think tanks, they will have evaluated it. Why is that possible? And it will happen. But why can't the British people have the chance of a proper evaluation when they know whether it's a good deal or not?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, I think he's heard my answer to that question in response to a number of questions earlier, and I refer him to that answer.
David Jones.
Honourable friend, please confirm that she intends to ensure that the treaty which is envisaged by this political declaration will include a provision analogous to Article 50 of the Treaty on European Union, which will enable the United Kingdom, should it so wish, to withdraw from that arrangement.
My right honourable friend will know that we have already said that in looking at the treaty for the future, we do think it's important to do a couple of things. He talks about being able to bring a treaty to an end, but I think it's also important because we accept that over the years, trade relationships develop, change, administrative arrangements change, to have a regular review mechanism in place, so that as those changes take place, it is possible to make changes to the agreement.
Chris Leslie.
Wasn't her fundamental mistake triggering Article 50 without getting that commitment to conclude a future trade agreement before exit day? And as a result, she's asking the country to trust her, take a leap in the dark, entirely on the basis of this flimsy, unenforceable set of political words. It's year after year after year of further negotiations, or can the Prime Minister now tell us when the negotiations on that future trade arrangement would conclude?
Hear, hear. Say to the right honourable gentleman, because he's also heard me say in response to other questions, the determination and the commitment that both sides have to ensure that those negotiations take place such that the future framework is in place at the end of December 2020. But I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, he complains that we triggered Article 50 at the point at which we did, because I might remind him that the Leader of the Opposition wanted to trigger Article 50. No, the Leader of the Opposition wanted to trigger Article 50 the day after the referendum.
Thank
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Federation of Small Businesses, the CBI, the vast majority of the members of the Institute of Directors, even the Ulster Farmers Union, they're all saying that they support the withdrawal agreement. For those of us who care about the jobs and economic security of our constituents, shouldn't we be supporting it too?
I agree with my honourable friend. I think it is important that what this deal does is it delivers on the vote of the referendum, but it protects jobs and it protects the security and livelihoods of people up and down the country.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can we be clear, Mr. Speaker, what a deal is and what it is not? A deal is what we have at the moment. I happen to think it's a very good deal. This is simply a piece of paper full of meaningless waffle. It's not legally binding. It doesn't have anything about frictionless trade in it. It has lots about the ECJ in it, even though the Prime Minister claims it doesn't. And it cuts off the opportunities for our young people and their future. The benches are emptying out behind the Prime Minister. When will she realise that the only way out of this crisis is going to be to put this back to the British people in a people's vote?
The honourable gentleman says that what we have at the moment is a deal. What we have at the moment is membership of the European Union, and the British people voted for us to cease that membership and leave the European Union.
Luke Graham.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to welcome paragraph 53 that talks about the entry and stay purposes for research, study, training and youth exchanges, which is incredibly important for professionals and young people in my constituency. Will my right honourable friend also confirm another issue that's very close to my constituency, that on us leaving the CAP, and that we will have as close and frictionless trade in agriculture goods as possible?
I'm happy to confirm that to my honourable friend. I think the exchanges he's referred to are indeed important, particularly for young people and young professionals. We will be leaving the Common Agricultural Policy. Obviously, we'll be putting in place our alternative proposals for the support for the agricultural sector, and we will be looking to ensure that for agricultural products as well as goods, we have that ability to move products across the border as easily as possible.
Tom Bray.
The Prime Minister won't apologise to EU citizens for accusing them of queue jumping. I do so on her behalf. To make amends, will she confirm that there are no circumstances in which she will inflict no deal on the country, and will she offer everyone a people's vote to get us out of this Brexit quagmire that she has created?
I refer the right honourable gentleman to the answer I've given earlier.
Steve Baker.
Paragraph 23 makes provision for us to be in the single customs territory provided for in the withdrawal agreement. Paragraph 135 makes provision that we could be fined for not following EU law. Which normal independent country has an ambition to enter into this kind of relationship with the European Union? Mexico, Canada, Japan? What other country would want to submit to these kinds of arrangements?
Can I say to my honourable friend, he will also see in paragraph 23 that we say that this is an economic partnership that will ensure no tariffs, fees, charges or quantitative restrictions across all sectors, with ambitious customs arrangements. That is exactly something that, as I said in my statement, no other country has been offered by the European Union. This is a deal that delivers on the vote, but also protects jobs and security around the UK.
Mary Cray.
For £39 billion divorce fee, the British people are being offered the prospect of years, if not decades, of wrangling over sectors like transport, chemicals and the nuclear industry. The ECJ will be the final arbiter in any decision, with the ability to implement fines on us, and she is going to this summit pretending she can get this deal through Parliament when she knows she can't. Isn't it time to stop the madness, put this back to the people in a vote so they...
Can I say to the honourable lady that I've answered the question she put at the end I have answered previously, and I refer her to the answer I have given to other honourable and right honourable members of this House. But there is much else I could say about the other details in her question, but I will simply make this point. This deal does not make the European Court of Justice the final arbiter on any dispute in this area.
Greg Hands.
Mentioned that in the document there is the explicit and welcome reference to the UK pursuing an independent trade policy, including the ability to sign new trade deals with the rest of the world. Does that include specifically the ability to conclude free trade agreements?
Yes, we will have the opportunity to conclude free trade agreements with countries around the rest of the world. This is one of the aspects that I hope my right honourable friend sees has been inserted in this full political declaration to make absolutely clear the fact that we will have an independent trade policy.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In contrast to the member from North East Somerset, can I say to the Prime Minister how pleased I am to see her recognise the role of the European Court of Justice? Because given this agreement explicitly states not only will we respect its integrity and agree to binding rulings, but we will also consider financial compensation for when they are broken. Can she tell us a little bit more about how she intends to influence the decisions of the ECJ, given the impact this will have on British businesses and British jobs?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that what is absolutely clear is that in the future relationship we will have with the European Union, there will not be the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice here in the United Kingdom. It is possible that the Honourable Lady is thinking of the circumstances that have been put in place in the withdrawal agreement in relation to those cases that are either pending in relation to the European Court of Justice and Union law before we leave, or those cases that relate to activity which has taken place under European Union law while we were a member of the European Union, in which case it will be possible for those cases to continue to be taken as they would have been had we remained a member.
Dr. Andrew Mearson.
My right honourable friend in getting alternative arrangements into the narrative, which is a very considerable achievement indeed. But given Articles 174 to 178, to what extent does she think that the independent arbitration panel ultimately will be able to determine if and when the conditions for alternative arrangements have been met?
My honourable friend has clearly made a careful study of the withdrawal agreement, and he will know from that withdrawal agreement that it will be the process that will take place is that if we are in the backstop and want to indicate and believe that we have alternative arrangements, be it the future relationship or another arrangement that means that the backstop is no longer necessary, then that would be a matter initially to be discussed between the United Kingdom and the European Union through the Joint Committee. It would be possible if there were no agreement and if there were concern about the good faith in relation to this, for that matter to be arbitrable before the arbitration panel. And of course, it is not for me to set out the sort of decision that the arbitration panel will take. It would be for them at that point in time to determine whether either side had been failing to act in the way in which it was intended.
Pat McFadden.
Sector after sector, these proposals represent a downgrading of UK power and influence compared to what we have now. That's one side of the equation here. But I want to ask the Prime Minister about the other side of the equation. Can she look the House in the eye and say that these proposals will make the country economically better off than continuing with our current arrangement?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that I don't agree with the first part of his question. I believe that actually as an independent state outside of the European Union, the United Kingdom will continue to play a very key role in a number of multilateral organisations around the world, like the United Nations and NATO. We will continue, and more than that, we have already started to extend our partnership to countries around the world where we have not had that same extent of partnership as a member of the European Union, and looking forward to us outside of the European Union. And outside of the European Union, I think the right honourable gentleman has probably asked me the question about the economics previously. Outside of the European Union, I believe it's important for us not only to have a good trade relationship with the European Union, that is what this deal delivers, but also to be able to develop those trade relationships around the rest of the world.
Sir Edward Lee.
Will the Prime Minister help those of us who want to try and help her in this vote? She knows that what we're worried about is that we'll be trapped for years in a customs union. Now, she tells us that this backstop is temporary. So can she give me this commitment? Given that the Vienna Convention makes it absolutely clear that a sovereign state can abrogate any part of a treaty with an international body when it likes, and this Parliament cannot bind its successors, If by the end of this Parliament, or the due date of the end of this Parliament, by the 1st of January 2022, if we are still trapped in these temporary arrangements, will she assure me that she will abrogate those treaties and we will become an independent nation again?
Can I say to my honourable friend that he has raised the premise of his question is that we would be in the backstop by the 1st of January 2022. I repeat to my honourable friend and to others, first of all, that it is our intention and the intention of the European Union to work to ensure that the backstop need never be brought into place. There are many references throughout the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration that make clear the temporary nature of the backstop should it be exercised. But of course, as I've said earlier, even if there were an interim arrangement necessary, it would be the case that there were alternative arrangements, the extension of the IP, that could be in place instead of the backstop. He asked me about the due date for the end of this Parliament, the general election in 2022. What I am very clear about is that it is my firm intention that we will be firmly in our future relationship with the European Union by the time of the next general election, such that we are able to look the British people in the eye and say, you gave us an instruction to leave the European Union and we have delivered.
Mike Gapes.
Speaker, the outline declaration last week referred to Europol and Eurojust, but they are not mentioned in this declaration. All we have is the Prime Minister saying there would be a surrender agreement. Now, frankly, given the loss of British influence that there will be, even though we continue to participate in security arrangements of different kinds, but we aren't actually making any decisions, this is an apt description, isn't it, of the whole document, a surrender of influence agreement for our country.
No, it is not. And the honourable gentleman mentioned specifically two of the institutions, two of the agencies in relation to the security matters. We have been discussing and negotiating. You'll see, obviously, the results of those negotiations in the political declaration. Growing recognition on part of the European Union. At the beginning of this, they felt they could not give the United Kingdom access to certain of these security arrangements and arrangements that deal with criminal justice because we would be a third country. Actually, both sides we made the case, and they accepted the case, that it is in their interests as well as ours to ensure that we do have access to those arrangements to keep people safe across the EU.
Alberto Costa.
Mr Speaker, earlier this morning I visited Year 5 in Danemill Primary School in Enderby before rushing back to London. The Year 5 children asked me questions about Brexit. Would the Prime Minister like to take this opportunity to tell the children of Danemill Primary School that the deal that she's proposing is in their best interests to ensure a brighter future for them and the whole of the United Kingdom?
Well, first of all, can I commend the pupils of Danemill School, who my honourable friend saw this morning, for the fact that they did ask him questions about Brexit, and can I reassure them and him that this is a deal which sets us on a course for a brighter future, and for those pupils this is about their future, it's about jobs, it's about opportunities for them. That's what this deal delivers.
Deirdre Brock.
Deal keeps the CFP after Brexit. We will still have the rules, but no way to influence them. No freedom of movement means the our fish processing industry will lose half its workforce. Trading access to our waters for trade access is exactly what the Fishing Federation argued against, and what her Scottish Secretary said would make him resign. Is he gone yet? Will she admit this is a disaster for Scotland and our fishing industry, sold out once again by a Tory government? Yep. What does she say to the families around Scotland whose livelihoods will be destroyed by this government?
What I say to the Honourable Lady and her Scottish nationalist colleagues is that I suggest they listen to the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, who has said the following: the declaration gives the UK the power to assert its position as an independent coastal state with full unfettered sovereignty over our waters.
Hugh Merriman. I've drafted and negotiated, indeed enacted,
scores of dispute resolution clauses over my years, and I can tell the Prime Minister that this one will work. In fact, it will even allow us to get out of the withdrawal agreement if the EU doesn't play ball. But my point is this: despite all the wrinkles honourable members may make here, this is a choice for us between an agreement which the EU will accept and certainty for our constituents, or playing Russian roulette with their security, their jobs and their earnings. And we should all think twice before playing politics.
Can I absolutely agree with my honourable friend? I recommend this deal. I think this is the right deal for the United Kingdom, and a failure to accept this deal, a failure to take this deal, does mean more uncertainty. It means more division, and frankly, it just takes us back to square one.
In calling the Honourable Lady the member for Bridgend, I hope the whole House will unite in congratulating the Honourable Lady on her election as President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, Mrs Madeleine Moon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, for those kind words. Can I therefore ask a very appropriate question of the Prime Minister? In the section on foreign policy, defence and security, 107 talks about considering appropriate arrangements for cooperation in space. Many space assets are vital for the defence and security of this country. How will all parties to this agreement ensure that whatever arrangements are made do not weaken the NATO alliance, and ensure that capability, any capability, is available for the future security and defence of the whole of the alliance membership?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady, first of all, I add my congratulations for her election as President, as the Speaker has referred to. I think what is important is she refers to what will be possible within NATO and the capabilities available to NATO. We remain absolutely committed, as we always have been, to NATO as the secure element of our defence. We have had to take some decisions, a key decision about some future capabilities, as she will be aware, in relation to Galileo, where what was being offered from the European Union would not have given us sufficient ability to be part and participate in that particular system, and that's why we decided to take our own decision and to go it alone on that particular area.
Sir Desmond Swain.
But it is a wish list, isn't it?
Can I say to my right honourable friend, no, this is a commitment on both sides to the future relationship that we will now be negotiating into legal text. And as he will, I'm sure, recognise, there is a linkage between the withdrawal agreement and this political declaration that makes clear the importance of both sides putting their best endeavours into ensuring that this future relationship is negotiated in legal text and available by the end of December 2020.
That's a yes. Angela Smith.
Speaker, the political declaration contains some interesting extra additions from last week's draft, including paragraph 54, which says that the parties also agreed to consider addressing social security coordination in the light of future movement of persons. That sounds as though EU nationals working in the UK under the terms of an agreement would be able to continue claiming benefits from our benefit system. Can the Prime Minister clarify?
This is in relation to some very specific issues which I'm happy to write to the Honourable Lady about.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I serve on the Select Committee with her, can I join in the whole House in congratulating President Moon on her appointment? Mr Speaker, unlike the Leader of the Opposition, I have read both of these documents. I was the party's spokesman on the Lisbon Treaty in 2008. A bagatelle of a mere 300 pages, so I believe that perhaps I have understood it. This, and I'd like the Prime Minister to confirm it, is not in any way legally binding. This is a draft treaty which, as the Select Committee Chairman knows, would bind us under international law. The problem I have is that the Prime Minister has repeatedly at the dispatch box made commitments that we would leave the customs union. It's in our election manifesto. And yet in this draft treaty, we would remain in the backstop and we could only leave if the EU allowed us. It is the so-called Hotel California dilemma. And moreover, she has said that she would never contemplate a border down the Irish Sea. And yet this document contemplates exactly that. Prime Minister, why have you repeatedly made commitments at the dispatch box and then done the opposite? And when will the meaningful vote be?
I think the right gentleman is concluding his question.
Ask the Prime Minister when the meaningful vote will be. Will it be before or after Christmas?
On the last point that my honourable friend made, discussions are taking place in the normal manner in relation to these matters. We want to ensure there's a balance we need to address between ensuring that there are sufficient days' debate for this House in coming up to the meaningful vote, but recognising also the timetable that we need to exercise, that we need to be aware of in relation to getting the withdrawal agreement bill through on the basis of a positive vote in the meaningful vote. Can I also say to my honourable friend, and I'm sure he won't be surprised, that I do not accept some of the points that he has made in relation to his interpretation of the nature of the document that we have before us. We will be leaving the customs union. That is something that he's absolutely right. I've said here at the dispatch box, I've said elsewhere, and I'm happy to repeat here at the dispatch box. That's the point of the future framework that we are setting up, that it does set up, and we have to put this into legal text, and he's right about the difference between these two documents, although we have that linkage clause in Article 184 in the withdrawal agreement in relation to the best endeavours to put this into place. But the backstop is, as I've responded earlier in relation to the backstop, but it is the future framework, the future relationship that we have that we want to see in place by the 1st of January 2021 that ensures we do not remain in the customs union, we do not remain in the single market, and that we are able to do the things and take the judgments and have control in those areas that people voted for when they voted in the referendum.
Mrs Helen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to the Prime Minister's last answer on the meaningful vote, can she make it clear that she and her new Brexit Secretary accept the recommendations of the Procedure Committee to have the votes and debates on amendments before the debate and vote on the main motion?
I say to the Honourable Lady, she'll recognise that there are certain matters that are for the House, but I will repeat the point that I have made in this chamber before on a number of occasions. I think if you asked the members of the public if Parliament is asked to vote on the deal that the government has brought back from Europe, what do you expect Parliament to vote on? And I think they would expect Parliament to be able to have a vote on the deal. Now, we've been clear that a motion may be amendable, but I think people will want to know the view of this Parliament on the deal as it is brought back from Europe.
Nick Herbert.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I welcome this declaration, and in particular the strong and explicit commitments to ensure that free movement will end, that the country will have the freedom to strike trade deals around the world, and yet that we will forge a strong and close economic partnership with the European Union. Is that not exactly what business wants? Is not the withdrawal agreement's provision for a transition period what business wants? And should we not, those of us that wish to implement the referendum decision and honour it, recognise that this sets the path towards a pragmatic and orderly Brexit that we should think very carefully before rejecting?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. The withdrawal agreement allows for that implementation period. That is exactly what business had requested and what will give business the certainty that they want. And I think that is exactly one of the aspects which every member of this House will wish to consider when they come to the meaningful vote.
We're streeting.
Mr. Speaker, my constituents who voted to leave the European Union want me to oppose this deal because It doesn't reflect for them the aspirations of sovereignty and control that were promised during the referendum. My constituents who voted Remain want me to vote against this deal because it doesn't deliver the economic security that led them to vote Remain, and all of them, I think, are horrified by the notion this country will be locked into protracted negotiations for years, if not decades. When the Prime Minister goes to the European Council this weekend, will she be honest with the other countries that this deal does not have the support of the House of Commons? And when will she wake up to the reality, which is if she wants to see this deal in practice, then for both principled reasons and pragmatic reasons, it's right to ask the people, do you want to proceed with Brexit as it is being delivered, or would you rather remain in the European Union? What she's afraid of.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave earlier.
Mr Conor Burns.
Mr Speaker, the reason why the 2016 referendum was the largest democratic exercise this country has ever seen was because that campaign engaged people who were marginalised and disillusioned and did not participate in our democratic process. And many of those people, in the months and years since that vote, have written to me, and I imagine to many other colleagues, expressing their concern that somehow what they voted for would not be delivered upon. And I have written back to them, based on the excellent speeches the Prime Minister has made, on the promises that both frontbenchers made in the manifesto last year, promising them that it would. But it strikes me that where we are today is not maybe where the Prime Minister hoped we would be when we started off. Would it not be more candid to say to the British public that this deal is not where the Prime Minister hoped we would be when she assumed office after that referendum?
Say to my honourable friend, obviously, when we go through negotiations, compromises are made on both sides. That's the nature of a negotiation. But what I have kept my focus on is delivering on what I believe were the key issues that, as he said, many people who had never entered the democratic process before voted for when they voted to leave the European Union. I think key for many people was bringing an end to free movement, and this brings an end to free movement. I think the end of the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, the end of sending those vast amounts of money to the European Union every year, were two other key factors that people voted for. And that is what this deal delivers. But it does that in a way that does protect their jobs. And I think the people that my honourable friend talks about, those who are up and down the country, who felt marginalised all too often in the past, I think want to see a government that is protecting their jobs and livelihoods, but is also setting a course which will give a brighter future for them and their children.
Mr Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Chancellor of the Exchequer conceded on national television last night that the government's worst of all world Brexit will make the country much poorer than the current position of being a member of the European Union. Does the Prime Minister agree with the Chancellor?
I've been asked the question by one of his right honourable friends in relation to our economic future. I believe life will be different outside the European Union. Of course life will be different outside the European Union. But what is to our economic advantage is being able to negotiate our own trade deals around the rest of the world, as well as having a good trade deal with the European Union. That's what this deal delivers. It's good for the UK, it's good for jobs.
Dr Sarah Wollaston.
Mr Speaker, Prime Minister, without informed consent, there is no valid consent. With the publication of the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration, we now have a much clearer idea of what Brexit looks like, and that allows people to weigh up the risks and the benefits. And that's what informed consent is all about. Would the Prime Minister accept that we've reached an impasse in this House, and that now that we're in a position to ask people for their informed consent, that really is the time for a people's vote on this final deal?
As I've indicated to a number of members, obviously I've answered this question about a people's vote before. I strongly believe, very strongly believe, that having asked people in this country to determine whether or not this country should remain in the European Union, we, as their elected representatives, should recognise the feeling that was expressed within that vote and should deliver for people on that vote. And that means delivering, leaving the European Union.
Dr Paul Williams.
Mr Speaker, the problem is that there are no guarantees
that things will be as good as they are now. NHS patients get new drugs 6 months earlier because we're members of the European Medicines Agency. But this declaration just says we will explore the possibility of future cooperation with the EMA. Wouldn't patients be better off joining my kids writing their wish list to Santa tonight than relying on this wish list from the Prime Minister?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that there's an assumption in relation to some of these issues, such as the recognition we have about the role of the European Medicines Agency in this political declaration, that somehow this is only about the UK asking the European Union. Actually, what we're looking at in relation to these matters, both that and the ECA and indeed EASA, is in a number of areas looking at what is in the mutual interests of both sides of this, both sides, the UK and the European Union. There's an awful lot of work done here in the UK by our pharmaceutical companies in terms of placing drugs on the European market. There are benefits to both sides for us being able to keep that cooperation in the European Medicines Agency.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister had already told the House that we would be giving a minimum of £39 billion away to the EU. We've learnt today that the implementation period might be extended, which would be billions of pounds more of taxpayers' money given away to the EU in return for a wish list. How does the Prime Minister square that with her red line that we're not giving billions of pounds to the European Union?
Can I say to my honourable friend, first of all, I didn't say it would be a minimum of £39 billion. The financial settlement that has been achieved within the withdrawal agreement is for £39 billion. That £39 billion is less than half what a number of commentators and others were saying, including coming from the European Union, at the beginning of that negotiation. It is right, there is a difference between the backstop and the extension of the implementation period, in that in the implementation period I think there would be an expectation of payments. In the backstop there is no financial obligation. It's precisely why, one of the reasons why that is not attractive to the European Union for us to be in the backstop. But the decision in relation to those, or indeed alternative arrangements that are developed, would be a decision for the United Kingdom to determine which of those we wish to be in, were it necessary, and as my honourable friend knows, I want it not to be necessary, but were it necessary, to cover an interim period before we were in the future relationship.
John Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister says that she has changed the minds of EU countries on data sharing to enable continued security cooperation. But rather than any mention of the second-generation SIS system, the strongest language here in paragraph 87 is that the parties should consider future arrangements appropriate to the UK's future status, such as the exchange of information on persons, with a view to delivering capabilities that, insofar as technically and legally possible and considered necessary in both parties' interests, approximate to those enabled by the relevant union mechanism. I put it to the Prime Minister that tortuous, weak language suggests that we are not going to remain part of that incredibly important system that she herself was Home Secretary when we gained full access to. To the honourable gentleman, that we have indeed moved the European Union on. As I said earlier, they started from the position that we couldn't share security capabilities because we were a non-member, and that position has changed. He references SIS2. SIS2 and ECRIS are two areas which I know a number of honourable members have raised and concerns about. Of course, what do SIS2 and ECRIS provide? They provide for the exchange of information on wanted or missing persons and objects, and of criminal records, which is exactly what is referenced here in the text in paragraph 87. So it doesn't name SIS2 and ECRIS, but it does refer to the information which is exchanged within those two bodies. It might help the honourable gentleman if I point out to him that actually SIS2 was technically a Schengen-based system, and in fact, as a member of the European Union outside Schengen, it took a lot of negotiation for us actually to get into SIS2, even within the European Union. What we have here is a recognition that the very data that is exchanged in SIS2 is data that we can put arrangements into place for ensuring that we're still able to exchange that data.
Mr. David Tregennick.
Speaker, may I congratulate my friend on the substantial progress she has made since last week, not least Clause 23 inclusion, that economic partnerships should ensure no tariffs across all sectors, which will be vital to my Midlands constituency with its manufacturing industry. But a critical issue to my constituents, 60% of whom voted out, is whether or not we will truly regain national self-determination by the 1st of January 2021. Can she reassure me on that point, please?
Good question.
My honourable friend is right. That is what I'm sure many people voted for, and that is what this future relationship will deliver. And as I've indicated, obviously we have to negotiate the legal text of that future relationship, but there is every commitment and determination to ensure that that is in place by the 1st of January 2021, and this deal will deliver that sovereignty that he looks for.
Yeah. Sir Edward Davey.
Okay, let's confirm that the political declaration is not legally binding and is merely the basis for at least one more year of protracted negotiations with our European partners.
As I've explained, we still have the legal text to negotiate in relation to this document, and we still have the legal text to negotiate in relation to this document. What we have is a linkage between the withdrawal agreement in Article 184 and the work that will go forward in relation to this. But yes, there is further negotiation on the legal text of this document. I've been very clear about that in answer to a number of questions.
Jeremy Lefroy.
I thank the Prime Minister for her steadfast focus on jobs throughout these negotiations. Paragraph or clause 32 talks about temporary entry and stay of natural persons for business purposes. Businesses and people in my constituency have said this is incredibly important in relation to both manufacturing and services. Can we ensure that this clause is as strong as possible in the agreement, because it does underpin hundreds of thousands of jobs in this country?
Can I say to my honourable friend, we recognise the importance of these temporary arrangements for businesses around the country. We will, of course, be, and we will have that in mind when we continue the legal negotiation on the legal text of these matters. But I recognise that temporary stay is important for many businesses, including those in his constituency.
Christian Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The hallmark of this process has been slogans and empty platitudes, and I'm afraid that this document just continues that run of poor form. But can I draw the Prime Minister's attention specifically to paragraph 24, where she talks about the parties exploring the possibility of cooperation of the UK and the EU with such agencies as the European Medicines Agency. Can I not remind the Prime Minister that in July this House voted to remain a part of the European Medicines Agency? She'll remember it was the amendment moved by her neighbour, the Honourable Member for Bracknell. Why is she ignoring the will of the House?
We're not ignoring the will of the House. We recognise what was expressed by this House back in the summer. We will be negotiating on the legal text in relation to the cooperation that we will have with the European Medicines Agency, the European Chemicals Agency and EASA.
Sir Mike Penning.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for siding with my constituents that were trusted this government and the opposition, because of their manifesto commitments, to leave the European Union as they voted. But it's obvious that the backstop does have concerns in this House and across the country, and she's done brilliantly well to negotiate more stuff in. Can I ask her to press a little bit harder when she's there on Saturday?
Can I thank my right honourable friend for reminding the House that actually I think it's something like 80% of members of this House actually stood on a manifesto commitment to leave the European Union, to deliver on the vote of the referendum. I hope all members will recall that when they come to look at the meaningful vote. He's right, and I recognise the concerns that have been expressed in relation to the backstop. That's why we have been looking at these alternative arrangements that could be put in place, and we'll continue to work on those.
Some way to go. Mr. Graham Stringer.
Mr. Speaker, I think we should celebrate the largest democratic vote in our history and be determined to implement leaving the European Union. However, I have to say that after 2.5 years, I am disappointed that the Prime Minister comes back, not with a deal, but for the preconditions for a negotiation, and expects the House to vote on it. The fact is that the European Commission, the European Parliament, the other 27 countries are more satisfied with what the Prime Minister has proposed to them than this House is. Yep. Because I don't believe in what the Prime Minister has said so far, that she is guaranteeing the future sovereignty of this country. If I can take just one example, she talks about regulatory alignment. That means that we will not be able to adjust our regulations and laws to enable our industry, biological industries, agricultural industries, from benefiting from our independence.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, not only, of course, that in clause 138 it is clear that both parties, it's the clear intent of both parties to develop in good faith agreements giving effect to this relationship, but he references the issue of sovereignty. The proposal that we put forward, what is in this political declaration, is a recognition that there is, if you like, a balance between the question of checks at the border and the degree to which rules are accepted on both sides of that border and operated on both sides of that border. What we set forward in the white paper we published in July was a recognition of that and a proposal that the frictionless trade came with a commitment to a common rule book, but with a parliamentary lock on that common rule book, so that it was a decision of the UK and a decision of the UK Parliament if it wished to diverge from those rules. But I'm sure the honourable gentleman will be aware that divergence from those rules, such that products would be manufactured not in line with the standards and regulations operating in the European Union, would have an impact on access to the market of the European Union, just as it would in any other agreement that we dealt with around the rest of the world. So we will be sovereign in relation to, as this deal does deliver that sovereignty, but in those circumstances, it would be for this House to make, with that in place, to make a decision as to where it wished to go in relation to the rule book that enabled access to a market versus divergence and a sovereign decision.
James Heapy.
Thank you very much, sir. As the Prime Minister herself has said, beyond this place, people are just desperate that we get Brexit over and done with. And I can also tell her that I have met many people in my constituency who admire greatly the resolve she's shown in pursuing this deal in recent weeks. Does she agree with me that they will look very dimly if we grind ourselves to a standstill here by pursuing ideological perfection rather than accepting the very good and pragmatic?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I think he's made a very important point. It is for us in this House to look at pragmatically at what will deliver for the British people. That is what I have done in delivering in this deal. It's what I believe the deal delivers for the British people, and he's right. We should remember those many people up and down the country who want us to get on with this and build that brighter future.
Hayes.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has spent much of the last 2 years wrangling with her own MPs and allowing the hard Brexiteer tail to wag the Tory dog. The result we now see is a blind Brexit in which 44% of UK trade will be dependent on the fulfilment of a wish list. Will she now concede that this level of fundamental risk to every nation and region of the UK and every sector of the UK economy is not what anyone voted for in June 2016?
People voted for is for us to leave the European Union, to do so to bring control of money, borders and laws back to this country, and we are doing that in a way that protects jobs and livelihoods up and down the country.
Richard Graham.
Speaker, there is much here that is reassuring for my constituents working in the health sector, aerospace, automobile and nuclear energy. Those who see above all the need for sensible compromise to achieve continuity rather than disruption when we leave the European Union. Does my right honourable friend agree that the big divide now is between them and those who would risk anything for no deal or no Brexit, putting at risk every chance of achieving a deal that few may love but most could live with?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I think he is right. I think most of our constituents up and down the country will want members of Parliament to look at delivering on the vote to leave the European Union, ensuring we leave the European Union, but also look at considerations around their jobs, their livelihoods and their futures. It is this deal that does both of those, protects jobs but also delivers on the vote.
Louise Haigh.
The police have agreed that the most important instruments for our security are the second-generation Schengen Information System, the European Arrest Warrant, ECRIS, Europol, Eurojust and European Investigation Orders. Isn't it the case that without full membership of these organisations or access to these databases, that we are blinding law enforcement in their fight against organised crime and terrorism?
Well, can I say, the Honourable Lady gave a list there of what she thought were important security arrangements. Of course, she left out PRUM and the passenger name records, which of course are incredibly important in dealing with organised criminals and in solving crimes and in dealing with terrorists. We're clear that we are working on the arrangements that will enable us to exchange the very information that is the type of information that is exchanged in SIS2 and ECRIS.
Bill Wiggin.
Speaker, I put aside my fear of the backstab agreement and come straight to the point. My right honourable friend is right. We don't want another referendum. We want to see the benefits of the one that we had. And to that end, I thoroughly welcome what she was saying about negotiating deals during the implementation period. Can she assure us all that those deals will come to fruition even if the implementation period is extended?
Well, those deals would come to fruition. I think the point is, in an extended implementation period, there would continue to be an issue about the ability to put those deals into practice, which may be the issue my honourable friend is raising, which is one of the factors about an extension to the implementation period, which, should we be balancing the backstop versus that or alternative arrangements, would have to be taken into account.
Mr. Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that my party colleagues and I profoundly disagree with her on the Ulster Protocol or the backstop agreement, but we do recognise that she's working very hard to square an elusive circle, and we pay tribute to her for that great difficulty. If paragraphs 26 and 27 in this declaration mean anything of substance, does the Prime Minister accept that there would be no need, therefore, for the Ulster Protocol or backstop? And can she confirm what she meant in page 5 of her statement today, that the backstop will be quickly superseded? Could she quantify what quickly means?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that he is right in this sense, that the alternative arrangements, or indeed the extension of the implementation period, could be chosen as a means of ensuring that the backstop was not put into place. When I talked about the period of time for which the backstop would be in place were it ever used, it is absolutely clear in a number of ways throughout this document that it is only intended to be temporary, because it is intended to cover an interim period before the future relationship comes in place. The best way for us to be able to guarantee our commitment to the people of Northern Ireland in relation to no hard border is through our future relationship, which will be the permanent relationship, which will ensure that we deliver on that commitment.
Mr. Marcus Jones.
Mr. Speaker, the majority of my constituents voted to leave the EU. Many of those people make up the thousands of workers in my constituency who work in manufacturing or the logistics industry, which completely depend on being able to move goods across borders. My constituents voted to get control of our money, our laws and our borders, but I'm sure in doing that they were also expecting that manufacturing industry and logistics would be able to continue to operate properly so that their jobs, and we can create more jobs in the future to go with them. Would my honourable friend confirm, my right honourable friend, confirm that that is exactly what she's trying to achieve in regard to the work she's doing on behalf of the British people?
Good question.
To my honourable friend, I think he is absolutely right. Many people, his constituents and others, voted leave in order to bring back control of our money laws and borders. But of course, they will also have wanted to ensure that those jobs were there for them and their children in the future. And our support for manufacturing industry is an important part of that. And that's exactly what this deal delivers.
Karen Buck.
The Prime Minister's talked
talked again today about there being a spectrum of future relationships with our closest and largest trading partners. But isn't it the truth that, stripped back to essentials, and despite the incredible vagueness of this document, that where this is leading us is very firmly towards a Canada-style free trade arrangement rather than any alternative model, and that this was widely understood to be an act of economic self-harm, that it will leave this country poorer, and that absolutely nobody voted in the 2016 referendum to be poorer?
I say to the Honourable Lady, I made clear in the statement that obviously there was that the European Union started from the position that there was a binary choice between the sort of Norway model or the Canada model, but they have accepted that there is a spectrum in relation to these matters where there is a balance between rights and obligations. That is what is clear within this document. We retain our ambition, our commitment, our objective of having frictionless trade. As I said earlier, it is the case that not everybody in Europe has accepted that, but we continue to work on that. And we continue to maintain that objective because it's about protecting jobs.
A woman.
The overwhelming vote to leave the EU in my constituency was a vote against politics as usual and a vote to bring back control of our money, borders and laws to this country. Like it or not, the reality is that the Prime Minister's deal is the only practical way to deliver that. So does she agree with me that voters should be appalled when they see people place narrow party interest above the national interest and risk subverting our democracy itself with talk of a second referendum?
Can I agree with my honourable friend? And he's right. He said many people in his constituency voted against politics as usual. I think they will be surprised to see politicians playing politics with this issue in this chamber. Every member of this House must consider the interests of constituents, the need to deliver on the vote that people gave to leave the European Union, and to do so in a way that is in the best interests of our constituents.
Jim Cunningham.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Following on from the honourable member from Nuneaton, in the West Midlands, which is largely manufacturing, and they rely very much on the free movement of labour, particularly for research and development in the universities, for example, in Coventry. I've had a lot of letters from constituents who work at those universities and the National Health Service concerned about the free movement of labour and that they might not be able to move as freely as they want to backwards and forward. Can she give some reassurances about those jobs? And that's the situation regarding those people.
And can I say to the honourable gentleman, free movement will come to an end, but what we will ensure is that we have an immigration system which is skills-based. I think that would reflect the concerns that he has expressed in his question. So it will be about the contribution that people can make here to the United Kingdom, and the Home Office will also look within that at ensuring the system that is in place is as easy to use and efficient as possible.
Mr. Hare.
Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister is absolutely right that we take no lectures from the SNP politicians on the opposition benches when it comes to fishing, because we know all too well that they want to drag our fishermen right back in to the common fisheries policy. But can my right honourable friend confirm that the UK will be sitting down unfettered at the negotiating table as an independent coastal state by December 2020 and on an annual basis thereafter?
Can I say to my honourable friend, that is certainly our position, that remains our position, and of course there is reference within the fisheries section, I think it's within the fisheries section within here, that does make reference to the desire to have those arrangements in place by July 2020, such that they are there in place for the consideration of the fishing quota, fixing access and quotas for 2021 and thereafter.
And Timms.
Speaker, on financial services, the Prime Minister said that equivalence won't be withdrawn on a whim. Can she tell the House what she means by that? At the moment, equivalence for a third country can be withdrawn by the European Union at 30 days' notice, as Switzerland is experiencing at the moment. Will it be different for the UK?
Yes, I mean, the point is that if he cares to look at the language that we have within the political declaration on this, this makes clear that what we're negotiating for financial services does in fact go beyond what is available elsewhere.
Charlie Elphick.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, Treasury Select Committee, we took evidence from Mr. Thompson, the Chief Executive of HMRC, who said it would take 24 months from the moment of certainty to put in place a new customs system. And he said that moment of certainty could be, say, next July. in which case you would have 6 months of transition or 6 months of backstop. Can the Prime Minister tell the House which would be selected, how and by who? And if there is no moment of certainty, because there is no ultimate agreement despite best endeavours of both sides, is there a risk that we end up in extended transition, effectively a form of Hotel California, and how do we resolve that particular risk?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I haven't had an opportunity to look at the transcript of the evidence that was given by HMRC yesterday. Of course, it was clear when we published our proposals on customs in the summer that the facilitated customs arrangement that was within that would be capable of mainly being in place by the 1st of January 2021, albeit that the repayment mechanism in that system would be would take longer to put into place. What my honourable friend will see throughout this document is the clear intent and determination of both parties to ensure that we negotiate these arrangements in relation to customs and the free trade area, and indeed the overall future relationship, such that it is in place by the 1st of January 2021.
Nick Smith. Mr. Speaker, we want a permanent customs union to support jobs in the UK. Now, in paragraph 23 on tariffs, which is in today's document, it commits to, and I quote, build and improve on the single customs territory. How will the government do that?
I say to the honourable gentleman there are a number of features of that single customs territory that I think are important in looking at customs arrangements for the future. For example, it has normally been said that it is not possible to have good customs arrangements with the European Union without free movement. That single customs territory allows us to do exactly that, to divide those two freedoms.
Maggie Through.
I'm pleased that paragraph 24 recognises the importance of our relationship with a number of EU agencies, especially as my local businesses express the importance of the role of the European Chemicals Agency. Could my honourable friend expand on how she sees our relationship developing with the European Chemicals Agency to reassure my local businesses as we leave the EU?
Say to my honourable friend, it is important, and we recognise the significance of these agencies, each in their own way, to businesses here in the United Kingdom. As I indicated earlier in response to a previous question, there is currently no model for that third country representation or participation in the European Chemicals Agency. That is precisely why it is necessary for us to carry on working with the European Union to see on what basis that and under what conditions that participation can take place.
And Dr. Lisa Cameron.
Mr. Speaker, we heard at the All-Party Group of Textile and Fashion, which I chair, that the industry have grave concerns about services, intellectual property rights and brand control. Instead of Choose Life, there was a newly designed T-shirt about her deal bearing the slogan "Fashion hates Brexit." Will the Prime Minister reassure this massive industry that contributes £21.9 billion to our economy annually?
Great question.
To the Honourable Lady, I recognise the significance of that industry to our economy, and I recognise because points of all representations have been made to me from within that industry, particularly about issues such as the future immigration system that we will put in place, and a concern to ensure that people of high skills will still be able to come to the United Kingdom to participate in that industry and help develop that industry, and our immigration system will indeed be skills-based.
Michael Tomlinson.
This political declaration negate the legal status of the backstop, which will be enshrined in a legally binding international treaty?
My honourable friend knows that the withdrawal agreement is indeed a legal document, that the political declaration still has to have the legal text negotiated around that political declaration. There is a linkage between the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration, which is set out clearly in the withdrawal agreement. And with regards to the backstop, it is clear that were we to be in it, it would be only temporary, but that is not the only option if it is necessary to have an interim arrangement to provide for our guarantees for the people of Northern Ireland prior to the future relationship coming in place.
Bill Esterson.
Article 8 of the withdrawal agreement says the UK is not going to have access to EU networks after we leave. This clearly contradicts the political declaration and its weak references in paragraph 24 to common regulations. So will the Prime Minister finally come clean with the chemicals, aviation and medical sectors referred to in the political declaration, and finally admit she hasn't the first idea how to deliver what they all need?
To the honourable gentleman, as I've answered in response to a number of other members of this House who've raised this issue, there is currently no model for that participation of a third country in the European Chemicals Agency or the European Medicines Agency. That is why it is necessary for the negotiation to take place to ensure that we can, because it is in the interests of both sides, the United Kingdom and the European Union, that such participation is available in the future.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has repeated today yet again that we will be leaving on the 29th of March. He has also repeated frequently that no deal is better than a bad deal. The 70% of my constituents who voted to leave are even more determined that they want that to happen. Can she give them an assurance that in the event that the agreement was rejected by the House, the government would hold fast and ensure that we did indeed still leave on the 29th of March?
Well, can I give my honourable friend the assurance that, as far as I'm concerned, we are leaving on the 29th of March 2019, and that's what this government is working towards. My honourable friend will be aware that there are some voices around this chamber who would prefer us not to be leaving on the 29th of March 2019, but I'm clear, I hear the odd yes from the Labour benches on that, but I'm clear that we will be leaving on the 29th of March 2019.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said in her statement the EU said the choice was binary, Norway or Canada. The political declaration concedes there is a spectrum. I'd like to hear what the Prime Minister's spectrum is. Surely, considering the range of views across the House, that spectrum should be to keep all the options open. Otherwise, this political declaration has already passed its sell-by date.
Minister.
Say to the honourable gentleman, actually it makes clear what that spectrum is in the document, and it is. I've referred to it on other occasions in response to questions. There is a balance between checks and controls and the acceptance of rules and regulations.
James Cleverly.
Sir, honourable and gallant members on both sides of the House will be familiar with the term mission command, and they will also be familiar with the importance of regularly restating the mission. So will my right honourable friend for the House today restate that any government led by her will have as its mission the fact that we will take back control of our money, our borders, our laws, our trade policy. We will honour the result of the referendum, and we will do so without putting our economic growth in jeopardy or the integrity of this United Kingdom.
I'm very happy to give my honourable friend the commitment that that is absolutely our mission.
Martin Whitfield.
Mr. Speaker, breaking up is clearly quite hard to do, but at least the Right Honourable Prime Minister has a sum in mind to pay over. But what about our pan-European families, where there is a break-up there and the stress of that situation, where we have children who are trying to seek access to parents, where we have lone parents trying to get assets and payments for their children? Is it really only to explore options confirmed in paragraph 58 for judicial cooperation, matrimonial and parental responsibility? Is that genuinely as far as we can go to make that helpful for families?
No, what we want to do is ensure that when we have the legal text in place, that we are able to see the cooperation, which I recognise is of a matter of concern to the families that the honourable gentleman has referred to, and is a matter that has been raised by the legal sector.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lincolnshire has a proud military heritage. A number of my constituents have contacted me with their concerns about news reports of the European Army. Can my right honourable friend reassure me and them that nothing in this withdrawal agreement will require our British forces to join a European army?
Very happy to give my honourable friend that absolute commitment. Indeed, it is the United Kingdom within the European Union that has been arguing against the creation of a European army. We are very clear that the bedrock of defence for Europe is NATO, and there may be ways in which the European Union can act that complement, on the defence field, that complement NATO, but there is no question of any British personnel joining a European army.
Wayne David.
Earlier this afternoon, the Prime Minister admitted to this House that she had failed to negotiate Britain's continued involvement in the Galileo satellite project. Can she tell the House how much it will cost this country to develop an alternative because of her failure?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that in any negotiation, there are two sides to that negotiation. Now, there were reasons why the European Union did not want the United Kingdom to be able to be part of Galileo on the basis on which we felt it was right for us to participate. Now, at that point, there's a decision to be taken. I suggest to the honourable gentleman that the real failure would have been to have said that we would have remained in Galileo on a basis that did not permit us to have guarantees in relation to our security. Better for us to say, we will do it ourselves and ensure that security.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Electro-pulse fishing by Dutch trawlers off the East Anglian coast is devastating our fisheries and should stop now. Can the Prime Minister confirm that there is nothing in the political declaration that undermines the cornerstone of the Fisheries Bill, that in future we will control access to our waters and will be able to stop this abhorrent practice?
Can I say to my honourable friend that indeed, as I said earlier, we will be an independent coastal state. We will be negotiating that access to our waters in our own interests. But also, as he will see within the fishing opportunities section of the political declaration, we're very clear that we need to work to ensure that fishing is at sustainable levels. That's in the interests of all fishermen, to ensure that the industry can survive and be sustainable into the future.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's deal has succeeded in uniting people who've written to me who voted Leave and voted Remain, and that position is reflected in this House in opposition to the deal. Given that there is no prospect of this House voting through her deal, and that then there is no prospect of this House voting for no deal, what is the contingency plan that the Prime Minister is making?
When I'm here recommending this deal, and all members of this House of Commons, when they come to the meaningful vote, will have to consider their duty, I believe, to deliver on the vote of the British people to leave the European Union and to consider the jobs of their constituents up and down the country. This deal protects those jobs and delivers on that vote.
Answer the question.
Ross Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have listened intently to what my right honourable friend has said on fishing. This afternoon, the Deputy EU Brexit negotiator, Sabine Whelan, tweeted, "We need an EU-UK fisheries agreement that covers both access to waters and market access, as is in the best interests of both sides." As this document is not binding, will my right honourable friend provide a cast-iron guarantee today and in writing to me, so we have it in black and white, that any fisheries agreement will never link access to our waters with single market access, and that the UK will determine who fishes in our waters, when they fish in our waters, and what they fish in our waters?
What the honourable gentleman has identified is that this is an issue on which there are very strong feelings within the European Union. And we have resisted and rigorously resisted attempts to link these two issues. The honourable gentleman asked me to write to him. I'm tempted to say, actually, what I said in my statement is the fisheries agreement is not something we will be trading off against any other priorities. That's not just in a letter from me to him, that will be in Hansard, and I hope he'll be able to take some comfort from that.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 200 of my constituents will lose their jobs. People who are highly skilled, who regulate chemicals for the agricultural sector, if this deal goes through. Why should they back her?
Say to the Honourable Lady, she has made a statement there. I'm not sure what the nature of the jobs that she's talking about for those individuals are. We are clear about the importance of our agricultural industry, about the importance of us negotiating in relation to the European Chemicals Agency, if that was one of the issues that she was talking about. This is a deal that is good for the UK because it is a deal that protects jobs.
Mr. William Ragg.
Mr. Speaker, while commending my right honourable friend for her extraordinary energies, given the whole basis of this declaration is trust, does my right honourable friend trust the European Union, and how ultimately will they be held to their side of the bargain?
We have negotiated in good faith, and as regards holding people to their side of the bargain, my honourable friend will see that there is action that can be taken in relation to taking legal measures that can be taken were it the case that we believe the European Union was no longer acting in good faith.
And Mr. Douglas Chapman.
I'm looking at a statement from Scottish Tories which said, let me make it absolutely clear, as we leave the EU, we need complete control over UK fishing, #non-negotiable. In a reply to the BBC, one of the honourable members was asked if the final deal would actually affect how they might vote in the meaningful vote, and he said yes, it would. That would be very important. Could I ask the Prime Minister, how is she going to explain to the whole Scottish backstab to the Scottish Tories, because the deal is not about complete control, is it, Prime Minister?
I say to the honourable gentleman, I suggest that he reads the Hansard to see the references that I made to fishing and the commitments that this government made to the fishing industry.
Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question won't live up to the build-up. 7 out of 10 of my constituents, young and old, voted to leave the European Union, and 2 things are very clear from talking to my constituents this weekend. Firstly, they're sick of Remainers telling them they didn't know what they voted for, and they're also tired of some Brexiteers telling them what it is they will accept as our exit from the European Union. So can I encourage her to press on as she is doing so? Secondly, though, and more importantly perhaps for where this House seems to be heading, is that they are sick and tired of hearing people talk of a second referendum. This was not talked about by either the Remain or Leave side in the referendum campaign. It would amount to a betrayal of that vote in 2016. It would be an establishment stitch-up that might please some in the metropolitan elite and their wealthy overseas backers, but it would be a gross act against democracy. So can my honourable friend assure this House that this government will put forward no legislation for a second referendum in any way?
I'm very happy to give my honourable friend that commitment, and he's absolutely right. That's why as I've said before, I think any second referendum would not be a people's vote, it would be a politician's vote.
Dr. Rupert Huck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a strange sense of déjà vu and, in fact, anticlimax in this document after over 2 years. The words "shall be decided" occur 127 times. And in paragraph 147 at the end, it states that there will be a high-level conference convened at least every 6 months, with no guarantees of anything. That is a possible Brexiternity. So I wanted to ask the Prime Minister, what date and time will it be that these negotiations ever end? And both with this and with last week's so-called deal, can't you just admit that she is flogging a dead horse?
I've made clear before, we will be working to ensure that the future relationship can be in place on the 1st of January 2021.
Neil O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I spent 8 years of my life campaigning against European integration and for a referendum. And I never thought that the day would come when I'd be holding in my hands a negotiated, detailed plan of the British government to leave the European Union. It is a huge achievement. As I decide what I think about this deal, I think about 3 things, Prime Minister. Firstly, I think about your incredible success in breaking the European Union's red lines and in securing tariff-free access to the European Union's internal market without paying in £10 billion every year and without having to give up control over immigration. That is a huge thing that the European Union have moved on, and we should recognise that. The second thing I think about is the fact that every single business group is backing this deal, and the Marxist Shadow Chancellor is against it. And the third and final thing I think about is that I've listened all afternoon to people again and again saying that they are going to try and stop Brexit. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that if the people who want to stop Brexit are successful, then a large number of people in this country will feel that our democracy has been profoundly undermined?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I absolutely agree with what he has just said. I think if this House were to stop Brexit, the British people would feel it was a gross betrayal of the trust that we had showed in them and they had shown in us. I believe it's a matter of our integrity as politicians that we deliver on the vote that we gave to the British people and that they told us to leave, in no uncertain terms, leave the European Union.
Dan Carden.
Mr. Speaker, the withdrawal agreement worsens the situation for the UK in terms of EU state aid, leaving the UK legally bound by European Commission decision. Currently, the European Commission waves through state aid cases case by case, but that won't be the case for the UK, with our economy and major industries permanently disadvantaged. And at the same time, workers' rights and environmental protections seem to not have any of the same type of protections. Was this negotiated by the Prime Minister, or was this at the behest of the EU?
Honourable gentlemen, we have made clear on a number of occasions, and the proposals that we have put forward are very clear about non-regression in relation to workers' rights. We already in some areas have higher standards on workers' rights than other countries in the European Union, and we have, as a government, been working to enhance workers' rights in a number of ways, not least in our response to the Matthew Taylor report. And it was this government that banned exclusivity clauses in zero-hours contracts, a matter which the Labour Party spoke about for many years but failed to do anything about.
Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. EU citizens currently make up 17% of UK academic staff, and many universities are concerned by the government's plans to roll out Tier 2 visas to EU citizens after Brexit. This means an average 3-month delay between job offer and job take-up. Universities tell me this will have a detrimental impact on their ability to continue to compete on the world stage. So what does the Prime Minister say to our universities, such as Goldsmiths in my constituency, about her plans to retain their global competitiveness?
Refer the honourable lady to the answer I gave to her honourable friend, the member for Coventry South.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to transport, the previous Brexit Secretary admitted he didn't understand the criticality of Dover. And shamefully, it took from June 2016 until just last month before the Transport Secretary bothered to go and visit the port of Dover. And after 2 years, the Transport Secretary promising an aviation agreement, he now admits talks haven't even begun. Does this not prove, firstly, that there are no plans in place for a no-deal, and also that this absolute ineptitude means there is no way this Prime Minister would be able to negotiate proper agreements in the implementation period?
Plans in place for no deal, and the government is continuing to work on those.
And Darren Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is something in this document that gives me hope. At paragraph 125, the British... At paragraph 125, Mr. Speaker, the British government has committed, in deciding the strategic direction for this future relationship, to encourage civil society dialogue. On European definitions, that means speaking to the public, Mr. Speaker. Now, if the Prime Minister won't commit to a general election or a people's vote, how will she seek to take the views of the British people on this proposal? And if she doesn't, does it not show that the words on this paper are worthless?
The British people gave us their view on our membership of the European Union in June 2016, and we're delivering on it.
Marsha de Cordova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For all the Prime Minister's bluster, this political declaration underlines that 18 months of shambolic negotiations has produced embarrassingly little. Parliament looks set to be asked to vote and agree to a blind Brexit and to a deal that, despite what the Prime Minister claims, does not protect jobs, does not protect rights or the economy. So when will she wake up to the realities that any deal she brings to this House does not command the support of this House and will leave this country poorer?
Can I say this is the right deal for the United Kingdom? It delivers on the vote and it does so by protecting jobs, livelihoods, security and our union.
Mr Kevin Brennan.
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister has recently said two things. On the one hand, she said the UK will definitely be leaving the European Union on March the 29th next year. In fact, she repeated that today. And on the other hand, she said there's a risk, although many of my constituents think there's a chance, that there could be no Brexit. How can those two statements coexist as statements of opinion in the Prime Minister's mind without causing a major malfunction?
Very, very simply, I am clear that we will be leaving the European Union on the 29th of March 2019. There are some voices across this House which want to frustrate that. That would betray the vote of the British people.
Mike Kane.
Mr Speaker, I genuinely believe this is a bad deal for the north of England, Mr Speaker. Manchester Airport in my constituency caters for 30 million passengers, but the PM's favourite rhetoric is about ending free movement. But does she not acknowledge that works both ways? Why on earth should I vote for a deal that restricts the right for workers to travel and work abroad?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, the United Kingdom will end free movement. We will bring in place our own immigration system for people from across the world, including the member states of the European Union. Of course, the arrangements that are put in place by other member states of the European Union will be a matter for those. We have here clearly arrangements that are in place for the sort of short-term visits, the tourist visits, the business visits, that are an important part of the movements that he's talking about.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As the newest member to this House, Mr Speaker, from day one I've received correspondence from my constituents on a daily basis. I've been bombarded with correspondence requesting and asking for a people's vote. The Prime Minister states that this is a good deal for the UK, and she's continually said this, not that it's the best deal or it's a brilliant deal, but it's a good deal for the UK. If she is confident enough with this negotiation, there is no reason why she would not go for a people's vote.
Can I say to the honourable lady, I refer to the answer I gave earlier.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In answer to the question from my right honourable friend from Barrow, the Prime Minister admitted, in relation in that case to Schengen, that it was incredibly difficult and took a long time to negotiate an agreement with the EU when you're already in the EU. So how on earth does she think it's going to be easy, straightforward and quick to negotiate all the hundreds, if not thousands, of agreements that fall out are implied in this document?
Good question.
I say to the honourable, first of all, because it's in the interest of both sides that we're actually able to have that access. And secondly, I think the fact that we did negotiate that membership of SIS2 despite not being a member of Schengen shows that it is possible to negotiate that when both sides see that it's in their interests.
Mr Andrew Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. If the Prime Minister is so proud of this document and the withdrawal agreement and believes it's what people voted for, why doesn't she seek to strengthen her really terribly weak negotiating hand by putting it to a people's vote with the alternative of staying in the EU? And before she gives another glib answer about this being what politicians want, almost 3,000 of my constituents have written to me with their concerns about Brexit. They deserve the courtesy of a proper answer from her.
Say to the honourable gentleman, I have answered the question of a people's vote. I have done so on a number of occasions, and he will be able to see that answer in the record in Hansard.
Daniel Zeichner.
Mr Speaker, I've listened closely to the answers the Prime Minister's given on questions raised about relationships with agencies like the European Medicines Agency. And people think this is a deal, but it's not, is it? It's the start of a long and complex negotiation. And she will know that representatives of the life sciences sector have said it's essential for our future that we have full membership of these agencies. Are they wrong?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman, as I referred earlier in one of my answers, it is very clear that it's the intent of both parties to develop in good faith agreements giving effect to this relationship. He talks about the life sciences sector. Of course, this government has been putting together that life sciences sector deal. We recognise the importance of the life sciences sector. It is our modern industrial strategy that is delivering for the life sciences sector.
Mr David Linden.
Very much, Mr Speaker. If we're being honest, a majority of members in this House are at an age when they've got more yesterdays than tomorrows. But there are millions of young people out there whose opportunities will be curtailed as a result of Brexit. So can I ask the Prime Minister a question I've been asking since I entered this House? If you're a first-year student at Loch End High School in Easterhouse, will you still be able to enjoy Erasmus by the time you leave high school?
Say to the honourable gentleman, Erasmus is exactly one of the programmes that we have referred to. We've referred to the continuing ability for us to participate in programmes, and Erasmus is one of those that we had in mind. But of course, what we have to do is look at the conditions that would be required for our membership, continuing membership of Erasmus. But can I challenge him, because I do not believe that it is the case that the futures of young people are in any way restricted as a result of our decision to leave the European Union. Indeed, the way in which we will be building new relationships around the rest of the world could enhance the futures of young people and the opportunities open to them.
Thank you. Order. We come now to the adjournment. The whip to move.
I beg to move.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr Mark Tammy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I'm very grateful to have been granted this debate on psychological support after cancer treatment, and I would thank any member that stay. I recognise there will probably be less than there have been in the last few hours to hear what I have to say. But when we talk about cancer, the conversation often starts with survival. While overall survival has doubled in the last 40 years in the UK, we lag behind the best in Europe, and survival rates for certain cancers, such as lung, brain and pancreatic, continue to be extremely low. This means there is rightly a drive towards early diagnosis and access to new and innovative treatments. But for most patients, just living is not enough. They want to live well. And that is why we must do more to ensure that patients receive the best possible psychological support after cancer treatment. It goes without saying that cancer can take a huge emotional toll on patients and those close to them, right from the moment of diagnosis itself. Less well understood are the consequences of cancer treatment, which can affect patients' lives on a daily basis and needing support for many years afterwards. No group illustrates this better than stem cell transplant patients. Every year in the UK, around 2,000 blood cancer patients need a stem cell transplant from a donor to save their life. It is usually their last hope. 1/3 of patients will be lucky to find a matching donor in their families. The remaining 2/3 of patients will require an unrelated donor. The search for a donor can be extremely stressful. Despite the fact that there are more than 1.4 incredible individuals on the stem cell donor register, there are still patients who miss out on a life-saving transplant they need because either no donor is available or a donor cannot be found early enough. And my experience with my own son was that we were very fortunate to find a donor. That donor then failed his medical, which was a traumatic experience for the family. Not only were we concerned what the problem was for the donor, but also would the donor then return to fulfil that pledge. Thankfully, and we will always be eternally grateful that he did do that. And even when a patient does find a match, this is not the end of their journeys. Tellingly, the day of a stem cell transplant is commonly referred to as day zero. Firstly, the patient must spend a number of weeks in a hospital isolation to protect them from infection. This alone can be a very difficult experience, with often patients feeling very cut off from the outside world. Even things like patchy Wi-Fi and poor facilities, rooms without windows, don't exactly help this experience. Hopefully then the patient begins their recovery. and this brings with it entirely new physical, emotional and practical challenges. In fact, of all cancer treatments, stem cell transplant patients experience some of the most severe long-term effects, and it is for this reason that they are often described as patients for life. To give you just some sort of idea of what it can be like for those living with the long-term effects, approximately half will suffer from graft versus host disease, which is when their new immune system attacks their own body. And this, I can certainly say, is not a particularly pleasant experience. And in the worst cases, it can actually kill the patient as well. Patients can also experience infertility, premature menopause, sexual dysfunction, fatigue, problems with their eyes, their bones, teeth, joints and muscles, and they are at a higher risk of infection and second cancers. In addition, it is not unusual for patients to be left with a range of psychological effects, including depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. All of this can have an impact on the patient's ability to study and work, and with that can become financial issues and even a loss of what their identity is. It can be completely and utterly overwhelming. With all this in mind, it is perhaps not surprising that in response to a survey of more than 300 stem cell transplant patients conducted by Anthony Nolan, the UK stem cell transplant charity, nearly half, 47%, said they needed emotional and psychological support, such as counselling or group therapy. What is surprising and even shocking, I think, is that just over half, 54%, actually received it. Now, to take some individual cases, take Joanna. Joanna received a stem cell transplant in 2016 to treat acute myeloid leukemia. It saved her life. But when she got home to her family, she couldn't get off the sofa or out of bed. It was the worst she had felt since the actual diagnosis itself. Her daughter was only a teenager at the time, and the caring role of mother to child had to be reversed. In Joanna's own words, "I think my lowest emotional time was after transplant. I questioned why I'd gone through this experience and just couldn't see an end in those first 3 or 4 months. I wish there had been more psychological support for me and my family. Even though the staff tried their best, when I really needed it, the help just wasn't there." And Joanna's story isn't unique. Ruth, a teacher from Yorkshire, also received a stem cell transplant in 2016. In the 2 years since, she has experienced many ups and downs and is still dealing with chronic graft versus host disease. For her, this means her eyes are constantly dry, she cannot perform fine motor skills too well, and her feet are in constant pain because of nerve damage. Ruth says, "The biggest downside of my whole transplant experience has been the complete lack of support since leaving hospital. It felt like I was on my own. My GP has offered me nothing. I'm on the waiting list for a counsellor, but how long that will be. I'm surprised you're not referred to a counsellor as soon as you've actually been diagnosed." And outside of patients that have received transplant, the charity Macmillan have provided me with some other personal stories, brief personal stories. Take Francis, who finished treatment for Hodgkin's lymphoma 5 years ago. "Emotionally, in the first year after treatment, I think I was shell-shocked because you're trying to catch up with everything that has happened to your body. You feel like you're a failure and you fail to bounce back in the way that you think you should have done." Kira, who finished treatment in 2016. "The fear of cancer never leaves you. But I'm trying now to think if it comes back, it comes back. I can't live under that shadow, but it's so difficult to mentally recover." And finally, Chris, who finished his treatment for head and neck cancer in 2016. "People say to me, I bet you wake up every morning feeling glad to be alive. You know, it can't be further from the truth." So, Joanna, Ruth's, Francis, Kira, Chris's stories affect all cancer patients, and they cover everybody. So, what do we really need to do about that? Firstly, psychological support is for everyone, not just those diagnosed with a mental health condition itself. Secondly, patients, families should also be offered psychological support. And thirdly, patients and their families are not getting the psychological support they need. To address these points in turn, psychological support is for everyone, and not just those diagnosed with a mental health condition such as depression or post-traumatic stress disorder. This includes patients who are feeling anxious, worried or frightened, and patients who are having trouble adjusting to their new normal. The fear of cancer returning can be particularly difficult to manage, and for some blood cancers, relapse is often a common occurrence. And even if you're doing physically well, the sense of dread never goes away, and it never goes away for the family members either. Because of patients' varied needs, psychological support can take many forms. Clinical psychologists and others working in improving access to psychological therapy services are able to help those in the most complex needs. Clinical nurse specialists, who we know are hugely valued by patients, can enhance overall well-being by providing general emotional support based on skilled communication and effective provision of information. The third sector, meanwhile, provides a wide range of services, including helplines, online forums and peer support. But there is no silver bullet. Rather, many different actors have got to play their role. The second point I made is that patients' families should be offered psychological support because they too feel the consequences of cancer treatment. If you are acting as their loved one's carer, your loved one's carer, this can affect the relationship and the ability to go about your daily life. It may be that you'll suddenly become one of the family's main breadwinners, and that this is a source of enormous stress. However, family members will often feel they have to put a brave face on things and somehow don't deserve help because they're not the ones that are actually ill. In reality, patients regularly say that they worry more about their family than themselves, and this in turn can affect their actual recovery. And I know from personal experience, the click sergeant nurse who came to us on a weekly basis to give my son chemotherapy, it was somebody to talk to. It was somebody who understood, and it was that side of the process was just as important to us as the actual medicine that was being given. And my final point was that patients and those close to them are not getting the psychological support they need. And according to the most recent results of the National Cancer Patients Experience Survey, only 2/3 of patients felt that they were able to discuss their fears and worries. And I hope the Minister will respond to this. In many cases, it comes down to the workforce. Either there are not enough specialists available who properly understand the consequences of cancer treatment, or the demand on staff time is so great it is impossible to provide patients with adequate psychological support. In response to a 2017 survey, GPs and nurses, 31% of respondents said that the workforce pressures mean patients are not being supported to regain good quality of life after treatment. In other cases, the right support exists, but patients are not being appropriately signposted. And I've heard of many patients having to be proactive to find help for themselves. Rather, patients should certainly be empowered to take control of their own care, but I think we would all agree that this should be a choice and not a necessity. They should not be let down by poor communication and coordination, but in many cases they are. I expect that the Minister may refer to the recovery package in her response, which consists of 4 main interventions: a holistic needs assessment and care plan, a treatment summary, a cancer care review to access to a health and wellbeing event. This can certainly help identify patients' psychological needs, and I welcome the fact that NHS England have committed to rolling out the recovery package nationally by 2020. However, does the Minister agree that identifying patient needs is only one piece of the puzzle and more needs to be done, that they actually receive the right psychological support?
Will my friend give way?
I will certainly give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he's making an extremely moving speech. And I'd just like to ask him, would he agree with me that actually getting the right psychological support from the start actually also helps the medical treatment? Because for many cancer patients and their families, who it's often, as he said, very painful to watch the treatment, getting that psychological support helps them to be able to face going through the treatment, which can be so devastating, as I know he knows.
I think that is very, very important. And what we have done, what we tend to do through the whole process, is address the disease itself and the physical aspects of the disease, but we do not address the psychological damage and problems that can actually occur. And I think my honourable friend is absolutely right that we do need to address that. Before I close, I would just take a moment to talk specific needs of children and teenagers and young adults who've had cancer. They experience many of the same physical and psychological problems as adults, but they also face some unique challenges, such as the impact on their growth and development and education and future prospects. Earlier this year, I was very pleased to be part of the All-Parliamentary Group on Children, Teenagers and Young Adults with Cancer inquiry into patient experience. And I would like to put on record my thanks to my honourable friend from Bristol West, who chairs the group, set up the group, and is doing some sterling work, and I thank her for that. When parents and young people were surveyed, 73% felt that not enough was being done to ensure access to post-treatment support. 26% of parents and young people identified mental and emotional health as the biggest improvement needed. As Kate Collins, Chief Executive of the Teenage Cancer Trust, summarised, young people have told us that actually the experience of being spat out at the end of the treatment can be as traumatic as diagnosis, because all of a sudden you've been radically changed. You've been through this remarkable transformation experience in lots of ways. You face problems that lots of adults have not had to face. You may be clear of cancer, but often young people are living with the long-term effects, be they psychological or physical. The APPG has therefore recognised